Never can figure out where it's supposed to be.
Musical chairs.
Okay, we're going to call the meeting to order. It's 5:30, October 9th, 2017, for the council chamber study session. And we are going to have also public works and community development discussion items. We'll start with roll call.
Mayor Wales.
Here.
Councilmember Baggett.
Here.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Here.
Councilmember Holman.
Here.
Councilmember Pelosa.
Here.
Councilmember Trout-Manuel.
Here.
And Councilmember Wagner.
He's here. We're going to start out with announcements. And I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Holman.
Thank you, Chair. Happy Columbus Day.
Thank you.
Your city council's meeting today because Columbus Day is a federal holiday and is not celebrated in or observed in Washington. Today in Olympia, Indigenous Peoples Day was observed. But the beginning of Columbus Day as a holiday started in 1792 as an Italian-American heritage celebration in New York City. The day was declared a federal holiday in 1937 by President Roosevelt. It is observed in 25 states and not observed in 25 states. The post office today was closed, but Auburn City Hall is open for business. And I'd like to take a brief moment of everyone's time to acknowledge the contributions of Italian Americans to the quality of life we enjoy here in Auburn. Beginning with my colleagues, Bill Pelosa and Claude DeCoursey, both of good Italian-American immigrant stock. In fact, Claude wrote a book about the Italian-American immigrant experience, and it's a good read if you are so inclined. I know where you could get a copy of the book. And, but also, Auburn has a long, rich, and proud history of Americans of Italian heritage making a difference. And I'd like to acknowledge those contributions to the quality of life we all enjoy. So thank you for that moment of time, Chair.
Okay, we're going to move forward. We're going to go to, under agenda items for council discussion, item A, ordinance 6658, modifying the business improvement area governing provisions.
Speaking of Italian Americans making a contribution.
Straight from Italy to Auburn, Washington.
Another chair. No, actually, you guys sit down. I'll stand. How about that? So, Madam Chair and Council, Doug Lean, Economic Development Manager, Department of Administration. Thank you for hearing us tonight. And before you are members of the appointed BIA ratepayers who were appointed back in February. We have Giovanni DeQuattro, who is the Vice Chair of the committee. We have Laura Timer. We have Ronnie with Cosengo Chocolates. And we have this young man over here, Bob Lamont. Anyway, we wanted to come before you on this ordinance 6658. Wanted to take just a minute and go backwards in time a little bit on this. The BIA has been around since 1988. It was initially established by an ordinance 4293 at that time. It was amended in 2007, and there we've had a number of years that the BIA Ratepayer Board had not been active in a positive way to move those funds forward on an annual basis for their activity. We started last fall with numerous surveys and meetings and stakeholder meetings with the ratepayers, which are about 175 businesses are represented by this group, and came up with the go-ahead from them in January to move forward to keep it active. We came forward with the appointment of a 11-member board that you approved back in February, and they have worked very diligently for the last 6 months to, their number one goal was to deal with the ordinance 4293 that had become very outdated. Just in time, it had been almost 3 decades that it had been in place. So what we did, and through recommendation from our legal department, that what we do instead of compounding an amendment on top of an amendment on top of the original ordinance, what we did is we kept the same, used the same authority that was delivered to them from 4293 back in 1988 to this current one. And what they did is basically went through the language over that 6 months, drafted this new ordinance body, which is in 6658. There's 3 basic changes from the original 1988 version. There is no red line to this because it's not an amendment to that original ordinance. It's a new language that cleaned up everything and brought it forward, which makes it much simpler and cleaner for them to work under. So what it basically does is creates a Title II within the city's code. It never was included in the city's code, so it creates its own chapter, which is a good thing. And then it basically keeps everything else the same. Boundary, fees, their intent, everything is identical to what was originally envisioned by the businesses at that time in 1988 when the council then, that current council at that time approved it. What it does change, though, is it cleans up a real difficult gray area that had always been there, and that was under the term of exemptions within the code. So over the years, there had been a very sporadic way that exemptions had been handed out under who paid and who didn't. So basically, in a nutshell, what this thing, what the modification does is it eliminates all exemptions, puts all the businesses on the same footing, under the same rate schedule, which basically, that hasn't been touched since 2007. The minimum a business can pay is $150 a month. The maximum a business can pay is $1,500.
A year.
A year, I'm sorry, a year.
That's why we have a board.
That's right. They keep me, believe me, they keep me straight on a pretty regular basis. So it ranges based on square footage of retail space between a minimum of $150 to $1,500 a year. And that's collected with their business license once a year. So it's self-imposed by them as a group of businesses for their advantage as a collective group. The 2 exemptions that were maintained was city government is exempt. I took care of, we had that, kept that one in there. And then also a legitimate 501c3 nonprofit with 5 full-time employees or less is exempt. So the free clinic, for example, would be exempt. Multicare would not be. That, I guess, would be a good explanation there of how that works. The only other cleanup that was done on the fees would be non-owner occupied landlords that commercial rental space is their business. So for example, if Laura owns her building and she's got 2 tenants in there, she's going to pay on her square footage and the next 2 businesses are going to pay their share. But if she decides to move out and lease out that 3rd space in her building, now the leasing of that commercial real estate becomes her main business. And she would pay a minimum fee of, I think it's $150 a year. So it puts some equity in there, even if they're non-owner occupied, that the association does receive benefit from their business activity, which the intent is that a better neighborhood around her building is created for her tenants to be happier and do better and have the right environment they want to be in. So they spent 6 months going through this worked very painstakingly. And I have to hand a big thank you to Jessica from the legal department. She hung in at every single meeting. We spent hours going through every page, every word, every map, every line. We even verified the legal description through our surveyors. And I don't think there was a rock they didn't turn over, and they had agreed collectively as a body that they weren't going to touch a stitch of work until they got the ordinance fixed and to their liking. And that's where they were last month. They voted 100% in favor of pushing it forward to you for consideration, and now they're working into their agenda on other items such as their participation with the ADA and how ADA will interact as the retail promotion side of downtown, and along with parking and lighting and cleanliness and all the things that they feel as a group of business owners they want to look into. So they are actively pulling their agenda together now to move forward at this point. So with that, I will answer any questions.
Councilmember Wagner.
I'm still having trouble understanding the situation for somebody who owns a building but does not occupy it. Other people occupy it, like Ruddles, if they were to rent that out. Explain again to me, the example there didn't quite.
Okay, so Jim and John own their building down there. They have 2 tenants in it. Those 2 tenants pay their fee based on square footage. Creative Valley Arts does not have any. Creative Valley Arts does not have any employees, so they would be exempt on their space.
But the Ruddle brothers don't owe anything because of owning.
Yeah, they would pay a minimum fee of $150 a year as a non-owner occupant of the building of a commercial space.
And then are those people in that category eligible to be on the board?
Sure, they're a ratepayer, hence the name of the board, ratepayer board, yes.
Councilmember
How
Trout
often
Manuel.
is the board going to be switched? Is everybody, all
3
the
years.
businesses going to be able to?
When you appointed them, or voted to appoint them back in January, I believe it was, or February, because they're 3-year terms on the board, and this was their first current sitting as a board, I don't know which ones are which.
We're staggered 1, 2, and 3 years.
Yeah, we staggered 1, 2, 3 years. So there, come December, there'll be, I think, 3 that technically drop off that they could be reappointed then to 3-year terms. So we had to stagger them out. And that list is on file in our office.
Sure.
Councilmember Pelosi.
I wanted to thank the board for volunteering for this. It was a complex issue. I followed it for many, many years. In fact, today when I was reading this, it said, where's the red line? So I can determine what's changed from 2007. Well, so there is no red line because you guys just swapped it out, and this is the document. So makes sense. But thanks again, you guys, for your volunteer work. Appreciate
Thank you.
So what do you see are the similarities and what are the differences between the business improvement area, the ADA, and the chamber? Tell me who's doing what and where do you overlap and what the overall mission is for Auburn business.
Okay, well, as you know, the chamber, the Auburn Area Chamber also includes Algona and Pacific and all businesses within that group and promoting business. And the chamber is more, I think, on the political side, helping get issues and situations on the political side so that businesses can improve and exceed. The Downtown Association has always been a separate 501c3 nonprofit, and the association was the one that received the funds from the BIA fees to promote and enhance downtown, and that's always been the association mission. The BIA, the Business Improvement Area, is a mapped, specific, boundaried area of businesses within the downtown core. And the fees that are collected once a year are to
Improve
deal with
business and parking and lighting and everything else that becomes a issue for that core. And so the BIA is collecting funds, and as a group, we are looking at all the different things that we feel that will improve the core area. The ADA would get a schedule of what they would like to do for the downtown, specifically the downtown area, and then we would help them with funds on
Requested basis.
requests that they make in that.
How much is usual, oh, Councilmember Wagner.
I've been following this regional growth centers and centers of other kinds at the PSRC, and our downtown is designated, I believe, as a regional growth center. Does that help or hurt, or what more could we do in that arena to help the BIA and the?
Yeah, that's a possibility. I mean, if there's benefits to that designation that we should pursue, that would help, either in grant dollars or tourism grant dollars or whatever. Obviously, it's just a matter of the staff time to be able to research it out and chase it and try to acquire that for them. And if that's a positive, we'll take a look. So,
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Is there any, Doug, is there any interaction between the committee and what the council's approved for the money we put in for the downtown enhancements every year? So is there any kind of discussion, or is there separate businesses that come in just to apply for the grants for the?
oh, for the facade grant program.
Facade, I'm sorry, the facade.
When
improvements,
the
right.
facade grant program was started as a test program, you know, we did that through economic development for the first budget cycle. We were able to get all $200,000 onto the street. And once we kind of got it going, you know, functioning, it made sense for planning and building to be dealing with it because it's permitting and design approval, and that's their world. Originally, at one time, the ADA, and I look at it this way, economic development still markets that program. We go out and try to, you know, if we hit a company that's coming in or an existing company that could be a benefactor to a facade grant, the ADA helps promote it, the BIA, you know, everybody kind of works. The chamber's aware of it, so it's an incentive that if we can help a small business look better, makes our Main Street look better, absolutely. Everybody's aware that that money is out there, and, you know, it's a word-of-mouth thing, really, with them.
The way I figure it, if you charge the minimum assessment, and you have 175 businesses, you're going to get about $27,000, which is a significant amount. Is there ever the possibility that you can use that seed money and request more from the city for a project? Or do you have to
When
do
you say that,
standalone projects?
You say that's what the increase would be, or the total?
That's your total.
Oh,
If
no.
it was minimum. She
That's
said
the
she-
minimum.
Oh,
Yeah, that's the minimum.
Actually, right now, just from a standpoint of fund update, the actual assessment totals out to probably about $65,000 to $70,000 a year, based on collections. Currently, right now, the BIA is sitting with no overhead, virtually, other than they encumbered a little bit today on a marketing partnership with Tourism Board. But anyway, they have about $80,000 in their fund right now. And with the change in exemptions and with some new businesses that have come on board, they probably will see their fees probably jump to close to $80,000. So they're funded fairly well to start out with, but they don't have a business, you know, a budget yet in place for that. So as they go through that, as the ADA comes in for their requested funds to do the marketing side for the BIA, you know, they'll answer your question. If they come up with a grand idea to do X and they are good stewards with their funds and done the best they can with what they've got, sure, they could come back to you and ask for additional help. And that's what their plan is.
Right.
So we will be having, on November 6th, if you're agreeable with this, it'll appear on your agenda for November 6th with a public hearing prior to that, your time, and at that meeting. And then also we will be doing mailings out to all the ratepayers that are within the group or the full list, and specifically those that we've identified that will no longer be exempted. So that public hearing will be November 6th.
How are you going to deal with collection if it becomes, sometimes our business licenses, we have a little bit of a challenge
Well, they don't, if they don't pay the fee, they don't get their business license. And I guess at that point, code enforcement and the board's gonna
got
get
it.
to be very good friends. And the board was very specific about that.
Okay.
The fee is paid at the same time the business license is paid, and if not, in January 2nd, I guess code enforcement can co-visit them. That's kind of the heavy-handed side of it, but that's the way the law's written.
When we did our research, there were several that would get their business license, but then not pay their BIA fees. So we all discussed and came up with a plan to, you want your business license, you pay for the BIA at the same time.
And business licensing has done an excellent job going after those fees that hadn't been paid. I think we're down to maybe like 3 businesses that are still out on collection right now.
Councilmember Trout Manuel?
What all do they get for their $150?
Well, right now, that's what we're in the process of figuring out. That was one of the first questions as a group that we asked ourselves. What can we offer the businesses? But first we had to identify how much money we had, how much money we were going to get, before we could identify what we could do for the businesses. So the money is going to dictate what we can do. And we're all downtown businesses, so it's going to be, what is this money as a group going to do for all of us?
So when they fill out their application, so when they fill out their application and it's got on their BIA $150 a year, what's the explanation of them?
Well, right now
What's the incentive of them to be a member?
Right on the very back of the city's business license form, there's a map and an explanation. And that text we're working on right now to get it more updated to the way the new ordinance is, the new language is. But I think it's pretty easy to explain that there's marketing, put shoes on the sidewalks, regional branding, events, cleanliness, lighting, security, parking. These are all areas that the board, now that they're getting into their new agenda, what subject matters, like today, they had a presentation from PD today on parking enforcement and where that's all going. They established a committee on parking of 3 members now. They're going to start looking at that issue. They've asked for an update on the redesign of Main Street that was done 2-3 years ago, and what's the status of that. You know, so they're beginning to look at all these different subject matters as the main board, which is, but yet then also they recognize that they have a nonprofit that is put together of their own ratepayers that is a standalone 501c3 that is eligible for event liquor licenses. They're insured properly. There's a whole nother world out there that the ADA can do that the BI cannot do.
So all of that is explained
Oh, yeah.
on their applications?
And we're going to be working on that. And the ADA had put together a brochure last year, and we're looking at that. Right now, they took a major move today. Tourism this morning put in place a digital marketing branding campaign for the 4th quarter. We presented the same campaign to the BIA today, and they voted to partner with tourism now on that digital marketing campaign that will start probably next week. And so both boards are, I believe, being very good stewards in what they have in minimal revenue to work with, and partnering together to have a bigger impact. And that's huge with those 2 boards.
Councilmember Wagner.
On those things like the advertising on the internet, do they pay for that? Did the tourism board pay for the thing we did with Think
Actually,
Big, Play Big, all that?
Oh, yeah. And matter of fact, the presentation that was done with both those boards today, the total digital ad buy for the 4th quarter was about $8,000, $7,500, I think. And that's actually being because part of it is focusing in on downtown, i.e. their interest. Tourism is more interested in heads and beds, and I will say the tourism board has embraced retail and citywide activity and entertainment as much as anything, because they feel that they do know that puts heads in their pillows. And then part of it is being focused on regional branding for the city, for us as a community, as general, as a destination, which is one of the strategies within our ED plan. So actually that $7,500 ad buy is being split 3 ways. Economic Development, Tourism, and BIA are splitting that cost 3 ways, so it's only a $2,500 impact on each. And so we're trying to make all of our budgets stretch a little further.
If you look on page 5 of 78, you have a description of the boundaries, and could you kind of just give me a visitor's or a pigeon's look down at what those lines are? Because,
The last page has.
oh, great, great.
I didn't know if we'd need this or not. so-
Oh, good.
So the basic boundary of the ADA is basically the big purple area in the middle. And so, with not looking at the map, it takes in, obviously, Main Street, which is recognizable. It goes down to, Ace Hardware is in it, and a couple of blocks down on West Main Street. And then it goes down to, just down to the elementary school on West, just before the high school.
Okay.
And then it does bleed off east and west, or north and south, somewhat into the residential areas and all that.
Okay.
Residential is not involved in the fee areas, but I think at the time in 1988, when they established that boundary, is they saw that as transitional neighborhood for professional office kind of product, and we have seen some of that bleed off of Main Street down into that neighborhood. That's the boundary of it.
Okay, so how far does it go up Auburn Way north?
It goes up the triangle with
Yeah.
the donut shop, the flower shop, and Little Caesars.
Yeah.
Goes
right
up
on
to
the
that,
corner
and then
there.
it goes to Cross Street. So Valero Gas is not, but the grocery outlet, that section is.
Yeah. So it stops at 18 and then goes up to like Domino's or Little Caesars.
Do you have a question? Thank you very much. Any other questions? Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank
Look
you.
forward to the public hearing and the
Bob.
rest. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now we are going to turn the meeting over to Rich.
Already there, huh?
Yes,
Good.
yes.
We've got plenty.
Okay.
Okay, the first is Sound Transit, and so I guess they are ready, given. yeah.
So good evening, Chairperson Wagner, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members. This evening, in a continuation of somewhat regular updates to the City Council on the Auburn Access Improvement Project, this evening we wanted to give you an update as to current activities. We have representatives from Sound Transit here. Both of them should be familiar to, Chelsea Levy and Sandra Fan, as well as Ingrid and myself, and we're all here to give you an update and share information with you. I'm going to kick it off. Ingrid's going to say a couple words, and then we're going to let Sandra and Chelsea run with it. But I wanted to put on kind of the record, probably the first, but probably not the last time you're going to hear this evening. As it relates to, council is very aware that there is a proposal by JLO Enterprises, represented by Jeff Oliphant, on a large-size parking garage that he has advanced forward. You've received copies of correspondence in the past about that. Members of our Transportation Advisory Board most recently reviewed material and spoke with Mr. Oliphant at their September 27th meeting. And I just want to iterate to council that at this point in the process, and this is Sound Transit's process, the city is a participant in that, very heavily involved participant, but this is Sound Transit's process, that at this point it is too early in Sound Transit's process to get into serious conversations about public-private or other types of partnerships. So as you go through the conversation this evening, I would encourage council to keep in mind that Sound Transit is not saying to no to Mr. Oliphant or anybody. They're just saying a little too early, and happy to have the conversation after the site for the parking garage that they're proposing to construct in our downtown area is selected. At that point, then I understand, and Chelsea and Sandra will confirm that this evening, that they would be open to any conversations from any party, including Mr. Oliphant. So I just want to put that on record. I'm going to turn it over to Ingrid for some thoughts.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add more of kind of a setting of the stage of the discussion for tonight. You'll see in their presentation, obviously we have potentially a recommendation from the council to the Sound Transit Board to eventually come out of this. The piece that the council needs to recall or remember in this process is that this is really a very high-level view at this point in time. It's more like a 50,000-foot level view of the different sites being considered for the parking garage. They have not gone through detailed level engineering analysis. That's not what the intent of this is for. It's really the high level of looking for, are there big red flags for any particular site in making that decision as to which one is the preferred site for the council to potentially make a recommendation to Sound Transit on. And at this point, there isn't necessarily any of the 4 sites that they've delved into, there really isn't huge red flags for any of those sites. So it's really coming down to kind of some of those other criteria that they'll go through tonight in that discussion with you. So, and then at the end of this, we'll also go through a little bit more in detail, kind of the input from the Transportation Advisory Board that we had on the 27th.
Great. Well, good evening. Thanks for having us back. We've been here many times in the last year to talk about this project. And now I think it's fair to say that we're nearing the end of this first phase of work, this phase where we select a site for the parking facility and then discuss in kind of at a high level non-motorized impacts. So as I think both Kevin and Ingrid mentioned, tonight we were hoping to have a discussion with you that might lead you to a recommendation to the Sound Transit Board. They're looking to make a selection of a preferred alternative on this project at their board meeting at the end of November, and they certainly give a lot of deference to the local perspective, the local city's preferences as well. So we started working with you on this project about a year ago, and one of the primary things you challenged us with was to accelerate the timeline. And so we've taken, we put our best foot forward in that, and that's really why we're here today, is because we've been able to accelerate this first phase of work over the course of what would normally take 18 months. We've done it in less than 12. And so this is just a first example of where we're looking throughout our project timeline that you can see here at, for opportunities to save time and deliver this project as fast as possible. So as we go through the discussion tonight, just keep that in mind. The sooner the board is able to select a preferred alternative, the sooner we'll be able to get into the environmental work and into engineering and construction. So tonight we wanted to review with you kind of the work that we have presented to you over the last year so that you have that to consider as you have your discussion later. We'll present again some of the data that the analysis that we've done, comparing the different sites, and some recent feedback that we've had from the public. We've recently gone out in an open house and received feedback on the public's preferred sites. And then we'll talk about next steps. So Sandra's going to give the bulk of the presentation, and then we'll have a discussion.
Okay. So you see on the screen and in your packet the project timeline that you've seen a number of times now. Just want to quickly step through it. You see here that we have a 7-year schedule with a potential parking garage being open to the public in 2023. Want to point out that this is assuming a traditional design, bid, build, project delivery approach. It assumes that we're acquiring a new property and building a parking garage on it. Where we are right now is in the alternatives development and screening phase in the light blue. And just to recap the steps we've taken, we came to you early in 2017 where we looked at project goals and objectives, went out to the public and received feedback from stakeholders and the general public about the goals and objectives and potential sites that we should be evaluating through this process for potential future parking garage. We then narrowed down the number of sites to a smaller handful or less than a handful and conducted more detailed environmental, well, not quite environmental, it's a little high-level environmental analysis, but other criteria as well. And then went out to the public just last month with some of the outcomes of our evaluation. So we're here now. You see the red arrow showing that we're looking to you to make a recommendation on what you feel should be the recommended site to take to the Sound Transit Board, and then in November is when we're asking them to identify a preferred alternative that will move into environmental review and preliminary design. And as Ingrid pointed out to you, the concepts that we evaluated in this initial phase are very, very high level. We're looking at less than 1% or 1 to 2% design, and very high-level environmental evaluation. And in the next phase, that's when we would be looking in a lot greater detail, taking the design up to potentially up to about 30%, conducting environmental review, identifying potential impacts and mitigation associated with a parking garage site.
So before we move, I wanted to mention that then the next opportunity to save time on the project schedule really has a lot to do with the project delivery method. So Sandra mentioned that this schedule assumes a design bid build delivery method. The other delivery method we might choose that could result in greater time and cost efficiencies is design build. So that's where the engineer and the construction firm work together to find efficiencies in the project. We've had some success with that in other Sound Transit projects, and early in this next phase of work, we'll decide what sort of delivery method fits best for this project, and we'll be able to come back with more information on that.
Yeah, so just to add on to that, in this stage, the most important thing is to narrow the number of sites. And if
Yes.
we have one site, that will make, that will help towards expediting the project delivery schedule. And then in the next phase, it is really the project delivery approach that will be, will kind of inform how long the project will take to get on the streets. And we're working with the city throughout the process until the garage opens, really. So there may be some more time savings that can be achieved later in the process.
Can we go back to the one you just had? Is there a time there where you can identify where alternate proposals such as JLOs would be considered?
So, yeah. So, for Mr. Oliphant, his proposal is specific to a specific site, and so if that site is selected, that would be the opportunity. It would be at that time, early in this next phase, if that site is selected, that would be the time to discuss alternate proposals for the site.
Where's that on the timeline approximately?
Oh, it's like
2018?
Yeah, 2018.
Yes.
And part of what you pointed out was that if you decide to look at alternatives, you have to give an opportunity to compete for others. How much time does that chew up in the 2018-19 time?
That's a good question that I don't know that we're able to answer right now, unless you know. I'll have to get back to you on that. I mean, I think it's fair to assume that it would take more time, but exactly how much time I couldn't say quite yet.
And you estimate whether it's 1 month or 24 months?
I'm not sure.
No, I'm
Probably
sorry,
would be more
but
the
let me
6-month time frame, not the.
let me get back to you this week on it.
I think that's an important consideration, assuming Site 1 gets chosen in this round,
Yeah.
in this analysis. It's important to know what delays we will see if we decide to support an alternative proposal.
If I may add, Chairperson, I think one of the reasons why Chelsea and Sandra may have difficulty is that until the Kent and Auburn projects, the idea of unsolicited proposals, which is their term, and you have a copy of that policy document in your packet, had never really happened before. So it's kind of a new realm of conversation internally for Sound Transit. So I think that's partly why they don't have a firm answer, because it's evolving.
It is evolving, thank you. That's a good explanation. And so this is, although we have a policy for it, this is actualizing the policy is new territory for us in Sound Transit. We don't just have to follow our rules, we also have to follow the Federal Transit Administration rules, and they are cumbersome. So I think it is an important consideration to have, because following FTA rules requires additional time. I think that's
Why I'm thinking it might be 24 months, and so I want to know what it is, because
It's fair to be
it would make me
conservative
think a
in
lot
your
differently about it than if it were less than 6. You have a question?
Yes, and if you could also give us an estimate at the time you share with us how much time might be needed to open it up for other competitive bids.
Yeah, sure, that would be good.
I would also like information on if it's currently 500 or 600 stalls and we were to increase it to 1,000 stalls, how much more construction time would that take? And if we did a partnership that increased it to 1,500 stalls, how much does that impact the actual construction time? And you can give that to us when you give us the other information. Because I think what we want to be able to do is, if we extend this out, this expedited 7 years, and we extend it out even further, we really want to have sound rationale as to why there's, a delay and be able to show benefit or, that we looked at it thoroughly.
Is that it for you guys? Oh, you got more slides.
We do have more slides. We can go quickly because you have seen a lot of this information before. In this slide, we're just trying to recap the goals and objectives that came out of the process and what we used to evaluate the different sites. You'll recall that access was really the main purpose of this project, to provide access for riders to the sounder station. Environment, so minimizing environmental impacts. Implementation, looking at engineering feasibility and timing, or how long it might take to implement the project, and cost. And then consistency and compatibility, looking both at regional goals and sound transit goals, and then also the community's goals for the parking garage and compatibility with the land uses in the area.
On access, it says maximize comfort and convenience for riders. So buried in the word convenience is congestion. And I'm wondering why you don't have that specifically outlined, because when you try to do one of these downtown, congestion is going to be a huge study area.
So for the project goals and objectives, we're trying to keep it high level, but if you look later on in the evaluation criteria, we actually did look at congestion to a degree, so to try to understand the relative impacts between the 4 sites.
Any questions?
So,
Yes. I'd be interested too in the cost. I know that a certain amount of money has been allocated for a certain number of stalls. And if we were to increase the number of stalls, the cost could go down per unit, per a stall unit, because some of the basic structure would need to be there for. So I'd be interested in if we did 500, an estimate of cost, and if we did 1,000, an estimate per stall, and if we did 500, or whatever numbers you think might be out there, so we can see where we might get a break on cost of stalls.
At this point, so we have some slides that will talk
good.
more specifically to this, but as we look at the evaluation criteria, I think it's important to keep in mind that the data that we've developed for this phase of the project, including the cost estimate and the number of stalls, is really only, it's at a very high level. The numbers will inevitably change, and the way you should consider them is in comparison to each other. So the cost and the number of stalls, when you see them higher or lower, you can imagine that if the kind of the rating, like if you get, well, let's just flip to that slide, actually.
Yeah.
So
it sounds like that's
six
where we're
more
going.
down,
Yeah.
I think it is.
Well, I assumed that we were at the birds level, or whatever that level is,
There.
and that it could be off, but it would be relatively off, I would think, on each of our estimates, and it would give us a feel.
One thing, if I might add, and Chelsea, you might want to go. Chelsea did a really great job with the Transportation Advisory Board of giving an explanation that if the cost savings that you're referring to, Deputy Mayor, usually don't come just because you're building more. It becomes in the construction process. So maybe if you give just a quick summary of the Angle Lake, I think that's a good example.
Great. So I mentioned the design build delivery method earlier, and one of, to go into a little bit more detail on that, one of the primary benefits of design build, as I mentioned, is that the engineer and the construction company, they form a partnership and they work together through every phase of development. What we did, so the Angle Lake Light Rail Extension plus the garage, those were 2 separate design build projects, and the result of the garage there was that, we put together what are called project requirements for a design builder, and we say your garage must include these factors and not include these factors, but we give them a lot of flexibility in the direction that we give them, and designs were only developed to about a 30% engineering level before we hand them over to a design builder. And the result of that in the Angle Lake project specifically was significant cost savings. We were able, for the amount of money we had to spend on a garage, they were able to build between 100 and 200 more parking stalls for the same cost. So that's what I mean when a lot could change. These are very preliminary numbers, the type of delivery method that we use, and over time, as we increase the amount of engineering, that is information that will help us really refine the cost estimates, as well as the number of parking stalls that will ultimately be built in the structure. So therefore, at this point in the project, the best thing to do with these data points here is just to use them in comparison to each other. So if you see, our estimate here is that Site 2 might allow for the most number of parking stalls. It doesn't really matter what these numbers are. It's just important to keep in mind that Site 2 might allow for the most number of parking stalls, in comparison to Site 3 that might allow for the least number of parking stalls, for example. It's maybe best to consider.
Well, you need to be careful there
I'm sorry.
too, because
Yeah.
it's more
They're all in the
associated
same
to the
ballpark.
cost, because Site 2 actually
Yes, thank
comes
you.
at a higher cost than Sites 1 and 4.
Yes.
So if you increase the number of stalls, it's more in proportion. If you increase them all, the relative cost will go up maybe at a similar percentage, but the cost will look similar compared to one another. But we are also working with a specific budget that we're trying to shoot for. So we have a $60 million budget that we're working with. I don't know that that's the right word to use, but so we are tied to that. That's available for this project, and whatever we can build within that, that's going to be allowable, but we aren't in a position to be able to offer more than what can be built over $60 million.
But with other proposals, there may be other funding sources. And so that's why I think your 60 million number shouldn't necessarily be a red flag threshold. The amount of product that you deliver can make the funding system perhaps different. And that's what I notice here is you told us before 60 million is what you're aiming for, and it looks like only one of them comes close to that if you use the absolute number instead of just the relative numbers. So when you go into the alternate proposals, will you require that the proposer give you a detailed cost estimate so that your engineers can compare that without having to start with a blank piece of paper? They can go down his list and say, we missed this one, or you overestimated this one. Will that be one of the requirements of alternate proposals?
I think the more detail that can be provided for us to be able to evaluate it, the better. And
So I can assume with this discussion that you will seriously look at alternative proposals.
Yes. Yes.
I think something to understand, as it's been explained to us, they will not actively go out and look for them.
Yeah.
But if a party comes in and makes a proposal,
Right.
they would then consider it, and I think the
That's
level of detail. I think it's also important to remember that it really depends whether or not there's an alternative proposal, depends on the site selection. So, Mr. Oliphant's already been very, upfront about he's focused on Site 1 as an example. There may be others that would be focused on other sites if they were proposed. So I think it's just key for the council to understand that this alternative proposal, unsolicited proposal process is something that they are evolving, but it's going to be the market coming to them.
Okay, but they are geared up to, if it's feasible, to possibly do it.
We are geared up to consider unsolicited proposals.
Okay, great.
Is the competitive, or I guess that's what they're called, competitive proposals, once you get an unsolicited one, you have to ask for competitive ones, apparently according to federal rules. And that's where I ask you, is it a month or 24 months for that to happen? And I really need an answer to that the next time we consider this, because it's significant if it's 24 months. Yes, Larry.
And I also need to know, again, what if we did additional construction, how much the construction phase of it would increase?
Yes, Bob.
I have a question. I may be jumping ahead here, but Site 4, doesn't that also involve a relocation of an existing business?
Yeah, so for both Sites 4 and Sites 2, we would be looking at acquiring the property and helping with the relocation of the.
Just noticed it didn't say anything about the relocation.
That's just that's part of the cost of
The machine
acquiring
issue,
the property.
yeah.
So, assisting.
What would be helpful for today's discussion? So we have some slides that we passed by. We could go back and look at sites 1 through 4 in more detail.
I know you have seen a lot of this information in a different visual format. This is the format that was actually presented at the open houses, the open house that was conducted last month. So, but it's not necessarily any new information than you've seen before in our presentations. It does highlight the number of stalls in the upper right corner, and in the case of Site 1, it's the net new stalls assumed 545. That's with the concept, very preliminary concept that we've laid out just to see if a concept could work that could potentially provide 500 stalls. So 545 is where we ended up once we put the box on the site and laid it out.
You said net new stalls. Does that mean we'd still have the existing stalls that are there? This would just go on top?
Well, we would rebuild. Yeah,
Yes.
it wouldn't go right on top, but yes, I understand there are about 130 existing stalls, so we would be looking at providing 545 plus the 130
great.
existing.
Good.
That's the assumption that we
Yeah,
made
okay.
in
I didn't
our
know that.
analysis. So, and that's a similar assumption for Site 3, where we have, you know, the existing Sound Transit site. We have parking on that site right now, and we were assuming that we were trying to add 500 spaces on top of what's already there. So a net increase of 500 or more at each of these sites.
And this is a slide where congestion occurs as a word. When you evaluate and say, yeah, there's going to be congestion, will there be any analysis of solutions to that?
Yeah, so what we did, I'll just go back to this slide, and you'll see some little red dots on the map. These are the locations where we did preliminary traffic analysis. We actually ran a model and looked at level of service and delay at these intersections. And these were locations that we worked with the city to identify that were areas where there's currently some congestion, and there was some sensitivity, concern that some of these potential sites we were looking at might trigger more of a traffic issue at any of these locations. So that's as far as we went in the traffic analysis at this time, just to show a relative comparison of the different sites at the same intersections. And what we saw was that there was not much variation at these particular locations. Once a site is identified, during the environmental analysis, we would conduct a much more thorough traffic analysis and work with the city to identify potential mitigation measures for traffic impacts.
So the comment on slide 1, if I can just add to that, where it talks about potentially higher mitigation needed for traffic congestion, that's kind of a gut feel reaction based upon that analysis, and we don't have the detail to go into what does that mean, how much mitigation does that mean compared to another site. The estimates that they have for each of the sites does include a value for dealing with some of those off-site mitigation in those numbers related to the garage construction, not the non-motorized improvements, but separate to the garage construction.
So, and you'll see in the packet that there are a few
Yes.
qualitative
I do.
comments. Yeah.
So, future growth. Say, hypothetically, say we select, Site 1 is selected. 500 plus, 600, 700, I don't know. But how many years of growth will that cover? Because this city is projected to gain a lot of population in the next 20 years, as an example. So when is Site 1, hypothetically, going to fill up and will be sprawling out into the neighborhoods again? Has any discussion among your group?
Parking is always a topic of conversation in our.
Yeah, but
Yes.
I'm saying,
Yeah.
we're going through
Yeah.
all this.
So, Sound Transit will never be able to provide a parking stall for every single person that wants to drive to our stations, whether it be Sound or a light rail. At the ST2 program, which this is a part of, assumed access improvements at all of the Sound or South stations. So around the same time this garage opens, parking garages will also open in Puyallup, Sumner, and Kent as well, which will cumulatively allow for over 2,000 parking stalls along the Sounder South line. So it's important to consider Auburn Station as part of this larger Sounder network. So today, it wouldn't be uncommon for somebody who is looking for, Auburn Station might be their closest station, but they know that it's more likely that they'll get a parking stall in the city of Kent at Kent Station at the time that they're looking for it. And so rather than coming to Auburn Station, they go to Kent Station. And the Sounder system allows for that because it gets you to the same destination up the line anyways. So we are adding significantly more parking at all of the stations over time, which will allow for some flexibility in how people access the station. But the truth of the matter is the region is growing significantly. We're anticipating 800,000 new people in the Sound Transit District by 2040. And Sound Transit, us, individual taxpayers, will never be able to afford to build parking stalls for every single person who might want to drive to the station. So that's why part of these access improvements include biking, walking, and bus connections to the station as well. And we're working very closely with King County Metro to talk about how they might better improve access to the Sounder station from local bus service as well. So it's really part of the transportation network that we're trying to make investments in.
And if I could add to that, what Chelsea just said really kind of sets the stage for what eventually, this council passed a downtown parking management strategy back in 2014, and it had a lot of short-term, midterm, and long-term goals. We've worked on some of those, but really what Chelsea is saying and the growth she's talking about is really going to push this city into a broader conversation about how we manage parking, both in the immediate downtown area and in the surrounding neighborhoods. So some of you may remember we did a pilot program several years back over by West Auburn where we did a residential parking permit program. We need to go back and more actively look at that and whether that needs to be looked at elsewhere. We also have commercial businesses around us that might be impacted by this. We also need to determine whether or not the way we manage on-street parking in the downtown right now is effective long-term. So we are kind of, because of, not necessarily because of Sound Transit, but because of the growth that Chelsea is referencing and because of the continued desire to come to our downtown to utilize services plus Sounder, we're going to have this conversation. So we're gearing up, kind of trying to figure out the best way to bring that conversation forward to council because it's going to be a complex conversation with probably lots of moving parts.
Chelsea, you said you're working with Metro. You probably know that the city contributes to a shuttle from the north end and a shuttle to Pierce County from the south end. Getting those two folks to talk to each other is always a trick, and you've been on one of those companies, so you know that, or entities. How are we going to get them to talk about additional shuttle service in addition to regular bus service?
Yeah, so Metro has a long-range plan that wasn't in place, a year or two ago, and this is now them looking further out than they ever have before. And as part of, and in addition to that, Sound Transit is working even more closely with Metro now and integrating all our future services. So they were very much at the table throughout this process. And as we're building out our system, they're building out theirs as well to tie into our system and help bring more riders to our stations. So it's a continuing conversation. We are not in a position where we can ask them to provide another shuttle, but they have been at the table and hearing the input through the process, and what we can do is help continue to facilitate the conversations.
At what point will you create probably a spreadsheet with the various alternatives for reducing congestion? One would be more shuttles, one would be charge for parking, another would be van pools to the station. There's probably 25 things that you could list and say on the rest of the matrix what the hurdles are and what the likely cost is and what the likely convenience improvement is. I think we need to do that since we're going to sit this downtown. We don't want to ruin downtown's retail business by having it totally plugged up 4 hours a day. So I think you need to go to something like that where we can all digest the options for congestion relief.
So, one way that we've approached this is to make investments across the board. So we don't need just one of those things. We actually need investments in all of them, and that gets to the transportation network that I was speaking to and really creating transportation choices for people. For example, I'll take myself. I live in Tacoma, and Sound Transit headquarters is in Seattle, and I don't want to drive by myself in my car. And I have 2 young children, and I have lots of other responsibilities outside of my work. And so I take the benefit. It is important to me as an individual to have transportation choices so that I can make a choice on my transportation options depending on what my life requires me to do that day. And so most days I take Sounder up to Seattle. There's some days where I can't get on the early morning train, so then I have to take the bus. There are other days where I have to make stops along the way, so I have to drive my car. As a commuter, I need transportation choices, and that's really what we're trying to do here is invest in all of those options so that everyone can have those same sorts of choices.
But as far as this project goes, we are really only able to focus on the capital improvements that we can make to help facilitate these connections.
I understand that's your job, but Sound Transit's a lot bigger outfit.
Yes.
And they should be doing this kind of strategic analysis of the choices. That's exactly what this matrix is I'm talking about, is that you can choose to pay for parking, you can choose to take a shuttle, you do all these choices. And another column on that matrix might be estimated time to reach Seattle. You know, there's a lot you could put into a quantified form for people to not only see what their choices are going to be when you're done, but can feel better about the high tabs they're paying and everything to get this done. Claude.
I just wanted to point out that being a member of the Regional Transit Committee, we have made a point with all the committee members to make sure that the long-range plan and all the alternative transportation plans includes the communication, cooperation, and integration with Sound Transit and other agencies across the region, which also includes the projection for PSRC's growth through 2040. Mm-hmm. So those particular elements are happening and in place. We've actually had a couple of presentations from Sound Transit in their working relationship with Metro at our RTC meeting. So I can keep you informed of that as well, but I think just for tonight, there's activity going on currently related to the long-range plan and alternative transportation plans that also include the parking garages, the park and rides, other alternative sources of transportation, and other alternative sources of parking, as was mentioned by Chelsea, and maybe other areas of parking to allow people to have more access to transit in general.
Have you seen in that RTC, have you seen anything like this matrix I'm describing?
No.
The choices we're going to have?
Yeah, we haven't seen the matrix, any matrix yet. What we have seen is items where they've done like comparables. For example, the most recent one was the comparable between Sound Transit's fees for bus transportation compared to RTC's, or Metro's new proposal for transportation fees for buses. And right now we're seeing an alignment of those fees. So you're not going to pay more for one than the other, for example.
Virgo.
Okay, if we could go back to the Puyallup Federal Way, Sumner and Kent garages. I'm pleased to see that we're looking at it from a regional point of view so that the 500 stalls plus the 130 that we have isn't the total answer. And the rest of them are probably about 500 apiece because you say there's a total of 2,000 parking spots. When are those parking garages supposed to be operational, realizing you're doing estimates also?
So in the 2021-2023 timeframe.
Okay. When is the Kent one supposed to open?
They're on the same schedule as this project is right now. I want to add that in addition to all the parking that's being provided for Sounder, the Link light rail system is expanding as well. And as it continues to extend to the south, there are parking facilities tied to every station that's being built out. So right now, Sound Transit has parking garages along the Sounder line and then a couple of the stations along Link light rail. But every single station that's being added to the south as we extend to Tacoma will have a parking facility associated with it as well. So there's quite a lot of additional parking that's going to be built into the overall Sound Transit system in South County and Hughes County over the next, 15 years.
But for the Link, we'd have to go to Federal Way to get access, wouldn't we?
Federal Way, Kent, yeah, Kent will have 2 stations as well. Right now, there's Angle Lake Station as well. But the you know, the fact is that the parking garage that you have right now in Auburn is being utilized by people other than, I mean, in addition to citizens within Auburn. So
Yeah.
people outside of Auburn that are coming here to ride Sounder have other options, will have more options as well.
I would also add, they're not just necessarily riding Sounder when they park there. They may be taking a bus from the bus station itself because it is a major hub, so.
Yeah. Again, that's a parking management issue too. But, so just to quickly, I have the summary of all the sites. I'm not sure if there's a need to go through them in great detail. You can look at them closely if you'd like, but we just highlight some of the key considerations as we review them. And then the summary table, which shows how they compare to one another based on various criteria that are tied to the goals and objectives that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. Just want to point out that the darker the circle, or the more full the circle, the higher performing option is in the specific criteria that's shown in the table. So in this table, we also have the net news parking stalls and the associated costs at this phase of project development shown. As we mentioned, we also did look at non-motorized access and transit access improvements as part of this project. This is a summary of what the findings were. Through the course of this project, we looked at a very broad range of potential improvements within the city that could help improve access to the stations. And what we came up with at this point is a priority list of projects that would serve the most riders trying to access the station. So, and we worked very closely with the city in this to make sure everything is coordinated with the plans that the city already has for non-motorized improvements, and also with Metro to identify locations where they thought they could help with speed and reliability of their services that they're providing to the station. And the total estimated cost at this time of the priority projects is just under $1 million for the highest performing options that came out of this analysis. And these are detailed, and then the projects will be better defined as the project advances in the next phase. We'll work on developing those projects a little bit further and defining them and figuring out who's doing what, really, between Sound Transit and the city. This is just a comparison of the relative costs. Again, we want to urge you to not to get too stuck on the actual costs that we've shown here, but rather the relative comparison of the different sites. We've got a red line showing the $60 million mark, and as you can see right now in these estimates, sites 1 and 4 are closest to the $6 million mark, and sites 2 and 3 are a bit higher. So it's best to just focus on the relative comparison, you know, what you can get for your money on these particular sites.
So I mentioned in our introduction that we in mid-September had an open house out on the station platform. And we had about 90 people walk through over the course of a few hours. The results, you know, we asked people for their preference, but often people were just asking questions about the project generally. Of those people who did give their opinions, the top preferences were for sites 1 and site 4. We had about the same number of people give preference for site 2 as opposed to opposing site 2. But more than anything, there was strong support for more parking, not surprisingly. There was also some concern about managing traffic regardless of where the site is, and that's a concern of ours and city staff as well. And then there was quite a bit of discussion about non-motorized improvements and a real desire to prioritize walkability and better bike access to the station as well. And so then we also, in September, at the end of September, met with the TAB And their focus and their discussion was really maximizing parking and minimizing traffic impacts. 5 of the 8 members of the TAB who responded to our question of whether they had a preference preferred Site 1. This note says that 3 of 6 expressed their preference at the meeting, and 2 followed up after the meeting. But it's important to note that in all of these responses, these are people offering their responses, and this isn't a scientific survey by any means. It's just the people who chose to participate in our questions to them. So I think that this is, this more than anything, I think the outreach we did here was important to raise awareness about this project and to answer questions. But this is kind of a snapshot of the type of feedback that we received.
And if I can add on the Transportation Advisory Board, there wasn't really strong support for Site 3 or Site 4 from the board members that responded both at the meeting and in a follow-up email after the meeting. Because we didn't have a quorum of the board at the September 27th meeting, they couldn't take an action and make a formal recommendation to the council. So that is kind of where they left it, is there really was priority for maximizing parking, minimizing both the traffic impacts around the city as well as ingress and egress out of that garage. Those are really what they saw as the priorities for whatever site gets picked.
Yes, Bill.
Question for you, Ingrid. Because there was not a quorum in the TAB, what credence do we have when you just have a small amount of members?
Correct, and that's why it's not a formal recommendation from Transportation Advisory Board. There are 15 members on that board. We had a response from 8 total of the membership, so it is what it is. You have that information along with the public open houses that they have done.
I guess the other thing that kind of bothers me is I belonged to many organizations in my career, and so we have 5 people at the meeting, right?
We had 6.
6. And so then we solicited 2 more away from this meeting.
So we actually sent an email to all of the members of the board asking if any of them had any additional input to add or wanted to meet.
I guess my point is, the other 2 members were not in a meeting atmosphere.
Correct, but they had been part of previous meetings discussing the Sound Transit project.
Something this important makes it difficult for the staff and you guys to receive information from a body that's been appointed to do this work. Anyway, that's my concern about that.
Mayor Wales.
This is $62 million of public money, 60 million. And we've tasked a group to come up with a recommendation, and maybe we can ask them to reconvene and come up with a recommendation while we solicit some of this other information on some of the information that you and I requested.
So part of the follow-up after the last meeting of the Transportation Advisory Board was a question to the board as to do they wish to meet again to try to have this discussion. So these have been being done as special meetings of the Transportation Advisory Board, which is extra meetings for them, and it's been difficult to get everybody to show up for those extra meetings. So we can try. I don't know that we're going to get any more response than what you've seen to date, because we have, again, reached out to them and asked 2 questions. 1, did they want to meet and discuss it further? And 2, if not, do they have any input?
Have you tried or thought about trying to use the Talk Auburn on our website? Oh, that probably will get a lot of responses from people who just got their license tabs, so it may be skewed as well. But have you thought about using that methodology to get a broader response?
I don't believe that we have used that for this particular item, because that hasn't been how Sound Transit has been handling the general public outreach. So the general public outreach has been Sound Transit's responsibility to do. We have been using the Transportation Advisory Board to try to help as a citizen group within the city to give them some more focused input.
Well, I would suggest that you at least think about using Talk Auburn, because if we do entertain something like JLO, we may be putting some more money into it. And so certainly there are residents in general, not just the TAB, would have opinions about that. And if you read Talk Howard, I read it quite a bit actually, on the questions that are asked.
I think if
It brings some real nutcases, but it brings a lot of people who think through it carefully, and it's worth reading.
I think that what several of the council members are asking for this evening really comes down to steps that would start in earnest after a site is selected. So what you're talking about, for example, council member, if Sound Transit chose a site and there was a unsolicited proposal for that site, and as part of that conversation, there was conversations around financing, there was conversations around congestion, then I think that's where the cities and its tools such as Talk Auburn or other social media tools could really come into play. I think the challenge for a lot of the things that the council is looking for right now is you're just slightly ahead of where Sound Transit needs to be. So the question I think really then becomes, is the council in a place, so right now tentatively on your schedule, next Monday, you would have potential consideration of a resolution to identify a preferred site. You don't have to do that, but it'd probably be good to talk about next steps before we break up here so that we have clarity about what your expectations are. Sound Transit has clarity about that before, and then we can figure out where to go next.
Yes, go. But you need a follow-up?
Well, no, not a follow-up. I wanted a startup.
Okay.
Startup, I'll follow.
You were talking about this video type communication.
No, well, it's internet.
Yeah.
It's all text.
Yeah, internet.
To do its work.
So I have one thought further than that. Why don't we replace those that are not interested and get some interested citizens to take their place? Obviously, there's some citizens that signed up and they have no interest in this.
Pardon me, Deputy Mayor. Bill, all of the members of the TAB have been appointed and approved through council. And the intent is to always get their recommendation on things that are transportation related. They have given their opinion on this. Some of them chose to remain silent on it. Some of them chose to respond at the meeting, and then 2 more added their comments via email. So that is a majority of the TAB that has responded, regardless of if it was in the meeting or if it was later via email. But all of those are appointed members. Not every time is every appointed member going to make a meeting. I mean, that's just how it is. We don't all make every meeting that we have been appointed to represent Auburn on. That's just the way it works. So to say that you want to replace those members who weren't there, I think is inappropriate. It's not what we do. Just because members of the Arts Commission aren't there to identify the next piece of art that's going to be purchased, that doesn't mean we replace them because they weren't there for that meeting.
Deputy Mayor Wales.
Well, can I address the mayor?
Well, let's drop that subject. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Wales.
I think that we owe it a shot. This is $60 million, not a $10,000 piece of art. $60 million. I think we need to give the committee another chance. I don't think we want to bring in new people because then we got to re-educate them. And you guys have done a tremendous amount of work. I think if the committee knew they're coming in for one thing and one thing only, to make a recommendation to us, and they have the power to make a recommendation to us in relationship to $60 million, they would show up.
So every meeting that we've had to talk about the Sound Transit project with the TAB has been a special meeting with that as the only subject on the agenda, including the one on the 27th with the indication that there was to be an action that came out of that. We can attempt to do another meeting, but I don't believe that we'll get any more response than what you have heard today.
Bill, you had another comment?
No, I don't.
Well, I want to throw something in here. You know, as the chair of the Public Works Committee for 15 years, I tried a similar thing to TAB twice the same thing happened. Everybody signed up, nobody came. And I think that's happening to us again. It's just a concept that people don't get passionate about as much as they should. And so that's why I think fussing with the tab is probably not as effective as thinking about other outreach methods that reach just our Auburn citizens. Maybe County Transit has to pay the Elway group to do a scientific study of 500 people. You know, that we do that, and what does it cost us, Nancy, when we do that, about $10,000 bucks?
We haven't done an Elway study for years.
Well, we did one 3 or 4 years ago, and I think it was about $10,000 bucks. That's a pretty small piece, 60 million. And so I would encourage you to think about something more statistically significant. Other questions? Yes.
I just think it's interesting when you look at, no matter whether you're doing surveys or whether, and I'm kind of leaving the committee out of this because they've made their choice whether or not they're going to be at a meeting, but they've also made their choice of making comments or participating in what we have, and eight of them did. You know, you send out surveys and you do all of those types of things, you don't get a good response. It just doesn't happen. Here we had an open house with 90 attendees and 1/3 of them returned forms. That's pretty typical. That's actually a pretty good number for getting back. Okay? I think what's important for us is to look at, if I just take this information here related to the results that are presented to us, sites 1, 2, and 4 seem to be the preferential sites. For site 3, long and narrow, nobody really likes that one. So we as a council are kind of down to 3 sites. And I think our responsibility is to what we believe would be the site that has the best benefit for everyone, including the issues related to traffic congestion, because no matter what we do in those 3 sites, and putting together a parking garage, and at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it's gridlock no matter what. Okay, we got a Auburn Way south and Auburn Way north, and a Highway 18 congestion when there's an amphitheater project going on, and we're going to see this every day. So we have to kind of work through that process ourselves, where we feel is the best way to address those issues. And again, I think in collaboration, cooperation, and communication with Sound Transit, we are, and with Metro, to how we're going to address those future needs related to mitigation efforts for that. Additional parking areas outside of the parking garage, alternative sources of transportation, all the different elements, A through Z, is what I think this council needs to focus on.
That's why I want a matrix.
Matrix.
So if I might.
Just a final shot, if I may. The council is going to be called upon to make a recommendation here in 1 week. Okay? So irrespective of whether we have a TAB input or whomever, it looks like we have all the information that we're going to get to make a decision next week. So that's the bottom line.
That's true. Yes.
Do we have all the information that we need? Do we need the other information that we requested?
Well, we need something on what an alternative proposal might do to the timeline. And I think you can probably get us that to some degree, although different proposals in JLO may have different time extensions. But I think the main thing you've probably got to deal with is some federal requirement for competitive bids and how you handle all those federal requirements, which, as you said, are huge. So that's the missing piece for me. And in the resolution, by the way, I was going to write it, I would like to specifically remind Sound Transit that they will entertain unsolicited or alternative proposals before making a final decision. Because I personally think the JLO proposal merits serious consideration, and there may be other outfits out there that want to do the same thing. So whoever's going to write I guess, Dan, you probably write the resolution. That I want something in there that reminds us that we will look at more than just these 4 sites as they exist now.
So we can, Chairperson, we can encourage that in the resolution as a statement by the council. I just wanted to point out that, again, any consideration by that will really come down to the site and any private party looking at that site as a value consideration to put together a package. So as it stands right now, I guess just for clarity, it sounds like the council is okay with moving forward to October 16th with potential consideration of a resolution with the language that, among the various language, with the language that the chairperson has identified. Sound Transit is going to provide some information to staff that we can include in the agenda packet to you that answers the question that you asked, Chairperson. Is there anything else that you need in order for this to come back to you, recognizing that it's consideration only?
Can we get those before Friday?
We'll work with the city clerk's office to try to get the information to you as quickly as possible.
It would be nice to have them to read ahead of time before we get our packet and have to, dive into our packet, so we can go through it and read it and really have a chance to read it,
So what is it?
We'll work with you.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll work with you. We've heard the request, Councilman. Heard the request,
you.
Councilman. Excuse me.
Okay, anything more from Sound Transit on the update? Are we clear on next steps then?
I think so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're at 7 o'clock. We've been here for an hour and a half. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll go to the next agenda item. We convene as part of that.
Delivery. You earned these.
No, Andrew's favorite. Moving right along.
I don't like this size. I mean, they've made them so much smaller than they used to be, but I like the smaller ones because of the peanut butter to chocolate ratio. It's different in the small ones than it is here, so you get a different flavor.
Once these get squished,
Yeah.
it's like a sandwich.
Thank you, Rich.
I wanted to try to get that tab thing closed off. Or drive. Clarity maybe that. But, my point about having tried this the third time, there has to be something wrong with the way we go about it. Because, you get people like Fred Rose signing up and some of those previous ones.
Most of the time, the members have but these specific it's not been as much interest for whatever reason. I mean, there are different members there at different times. And one of the things, Mike Harbin Jr. was at one of them that I sat in on, and his question was, okay, you told me how many parking stalls you're gonna create and how much over budget they are. Tell me how many at budget. I thought they were gonna mention that.
They kept telling us that we shouldn't pay much attention to the budget.
To the dollars, and
And I don't know that I buy that.
well, I think it is a little bit squishy, because just like Chelsea was saying with the design build, there are efficiencies that are gained during that.
She has an example of where that's happened.
Yeah. So they are squishy, but at the same time, just having somebody prepared to see that for $60 million at the site that's currently out, it's a $78 million project now, they're probably gonna build 300 and some stalls, as opposed to the 60.5 million. Probably be able to accommodate. Now, I will tell you,
Rob, how'd your ping pong match go today? We won. Yeah. How about you? You won. Good. Good.
Jeff's development.
They sing and sing.
Oh, no, I know, but I'm just, I'm not, that's all I'm doing. In that squishy area where they're talking development, right?
That's what I think is that, I don't know if they're us, bring in some money or whatever we think. I'm not. Like we're doing
I was watching this before I
Helen, what thing.
in California. The fires have just taken
Oh, yeah,
over.
so.
Isn't that terrible?
Yes, and they were taking people out of the hospital and could see the fire in back of that.
Yeah, I know, it's way more dramatic.
I almost feel like it's Armageddon with everything that's
You
going
know,
on.
I was thinking that the other day, Margot, it's just weird because of everything that's going on.
Oh, it's terrible.
Although I love that read-only button. That's,
Yes.
that's one of the best, funniest ideas I've ever heard.
I can't sign in.
He said that he wants to back out.
Really? Yeah.
Oh, his was funny.
Well, I'm not sure he's the only person saying this.
Subtitle of nastiness that she puts on my
I agree. Yeah, that was a great question to ask, because if it's gonna start.
It's gonna solve, do more than 3 months and do it for it. I wish they could look at it sooner.
Yeah.
Here it is. Since we'll put it in the resolution, we expect them to look at it eventually.
And then
he's a
all
good
this
guy.
stuff that, yeah, he is, he's wonderful.
You got these perverts going on.
They're all over. Wouldn't you think they're wonderful?
Okay, let's call the meeting back to order, and the next item is an IT update from the IT department.
We ready to go, sir?
Yep, we're ready.
Council, Mayor Backus, Paul Haugen, Director of Innovation and Technology. I'm only going to take a few seconds of your time tonight because I'm going to hand this over to some very smart people tonight. Let them show you what's going on. Just to put some context on this, we spend a lot of time in our IT updates about digital parity. If you remember, objective number 5 on your strategic goal is also about emerging technology. We have touched on that a few times. We thought tonight would be a good idea to show you some of the things we're working on that all have a defined specific business impact for the city. So that's what this is going to be tonight. So without further ado, you guys know Ashley?
Yeah.
No.
And Alice are going to present the latest things going on in IT for you.
Great. The kids.
All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to do 3 short videos. I'm literally just going to press play. We'll watch them. I'll probably talk during them because only one of them has sound. So if you have questions during those videos, feel free. And then we're going to go into a live demo with some mixed reality. So we'll start with the videos. What I want to start with the videos, though, is just say that these are all done with our drone. It's been about 1.5 years since we actually brought what the drone was to you guys and some things we can do with it. So we're going to do a video that is 100% done with the drone. We're going to do a 3D video that's done 100% with GIS data. And then we're going to do kind of a combination of those two combined. So again, we'll start with the first one, which is the golf course. And this one does have some sound on it.
It's probably got Bob in there swinging.
Familiar faces.
I see some familiar faces.
Is that a menace?
There's Bob, no.
Was that Ron? Yeah. Oh, we gotta go back. It does. Oh, that was a good shot, Bob.
There's Daryl.
There's Daryl. Ashley.
And Ashley. Isn't that pretty? to spend all day.
There we are.
Oh, I saw your legs.
I made it.
Oh, that's great. There
Oh,
you
wow.
are. Oh, isn't that cute? Oh, there the ball went right in the fountain. Oh,
Did you get it out, Bob? Oh, there's Clyde. There's Bob. His white legs.
I like the purple shirt, Bob.
Notice I'm the only one wearing shorts.
Not everyone has legs.
Chicken legs.
You guys had nice weather for
Okay, so a couple things. One, that was all the drone, and then Jason sent back there is the one who put all this together in a nice video. So this will be trimmed down a little bit. That's pretty long. We'll cut out some of the duplicate stuff, clean it up a little bit, but this will be going on the Auburn Golf Course website. This is the new marketing piece. So again, this was something where, one, we've never had this before. Two, the city was looking to pay someone to do this. And I don't know, what, 3 flights? 4 flights?
Yeah.
We were
2
able to
days.
do something like this in a couple of days worth of work. I think the bonus is we got some of you guys in it, we got some staff in it, we've kind of personalized it for Auburn, and this is an end product of that. So another use of the drone. This next one has no video, so I'll talk a little bit, or no sound, so I'll talk a little bit why it's going. We've actually chatted about this a few times. This is a 3D model, obviously, of downtown Auburn. What you'll see here is 100% data-driven model. So if Alice goes back to the office and changes a building, adds a building, puts a new street light in, it's gonna jump into this model. So what we're hoping to do is just keep adding to the level of detail and kind of make this model that's something that's useful, expand it for the entire city. So when Kevin asks us, hey, we need a model of Auburn Way South, we'll just say, there you go, scoot it over, and there's your model. The big thing about this one, though, outside of just, again, seeing a model which changes a 2D perspective, is it'll pop in here in just a moment, but we started putting in some proposed stuff. So as some of the earlier presenters had talked about today, well, what's it going to look like when there's a 5-story parking garage in? This model will show you what that looks like now. We can put the different locations in. We can put anything proposed in for that matter. I think we put in the 2 proposed buildings, not literally the shape and size of them, but just 2 proposed buildings that'll pop in here. The 2 lots to the south of us right now. So you'll see what that looks like. And again, these are all just flights that Alice decides how she wants this camera to go. So if we need to change, do we need to be higher, do we need to be lower, more zoomed out, whatever, you can start doing those types of things. So what we're really hoping, outside of just saying what some proposed stuff would look like, is being able to incorporate this into the city's processes. This is part of the development process, this is part of the capital project, things like that.
Now, are those 2 brand new buildings, the blue ones?
Correct.
They're
again,
not the
those aren't-
parking one, are they? They're just the apartments?
Correct. So those are not exactly what they're gonna look like. We just
Right,
threw
right.
buildings up there about the same height so you can see what it looks like. The whole idea is if we start walking down like Main and Division and we start taking a real perspective like this view is gonna give you, what it's really gonna look like. So you can see the size difference between, City Hall, for example, and the new buildings. Okay, and so the last short little video is much shorter than the last two we just watched. This next one's going to be 100% of data based off of the drone. So we did the same thing we did at the golf course.
Looks
We
better.
did it over downtown. And we used aerial imagery, you can see that we took from the drone, and then some regional LiDAR, basically elevation data that we had to create this model. So it's almost exactly what the last video just was, it's just got a pretty picture on it. So it gives it a little bit more realistic in areas, and other areas it looks a little weird. But you can just see we now have access to do both in these kind of predetermined models. So this particular flight, again, was about 2 to 3 different flights, so this can be done in a day's worth of time. So if we get to a point where we need something like this relatively quickly, weather dependent, we can do it.
Now, Alice, can you use those glasses and go on the roof and look at what's going on the roof of the City Hall?
Stealing the thunder here.
I want to look at the leaks and let Claude tell me what's going on with those leaks.
All right, so while this thing wraps up, just to reiterate a couple points. One, this was all done with existing technology. This was just something that we've never done before. We're kind of pushing the limits on something, and we have some talented staff to be able to pull this off, but we didn't spend a penny on any of this, and we can expand this to the entire city, we can make it specific areas, we can target it through processes, whatever the case may be, but we now have this type of capability. So wanted you guys to see that and be aware of it.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up about you didn't spend a penny, because that's what a lot of the constituents are always concerned about. What's it costing us? So that's good that you said that.
Yeah. And again, that was part of what we talked about earlier in the year, actually end of last year with you guys, is leveraging a lot of stuff. How can we leverage it better, more efficient to do these types of things? There's always going to be something that comes up, but at least we can leverage things that we have. So, okay, so this next one, actually, escape. So this next one is kind of an introduction to mixed reality.
I'm there all the time.
Oh.
Scroll down. Just scroll down. Yep. Just scroll down.
It has a mic.
Okay, so what we're demoing here is, Largo, you kind of talked about this a little bit, but we're taking the opposite approach. This is going to be everything that's below ground, we can now see above ground. And this is where we start getting into not having to dig, not have to look through drawings. This is literally what's underground here, Alice is looking at right now. And we're doing that because we're looking at GIS data, the stuff we just showed you. We're taking, instead of doing 3D models, we're just going the other way now. So with these lenses, and you can see it's real time, there's everyone right there, we're able to see underground infrastructure. Alice is able to click on whatever the asset is, and then it's going to pull up all the information that we have about that asset. We are in the very basic stages of this. We are hoping to show you a little bit more things today, like being able to change the data right here without having to do much. We had a Skype call planned with Jason where we can have called Jason back there, and Jason can see what she's seeing on her glasses and things like that. But we'll start small here just because I don't want anyone getting dizzy and stuff like that. It takes a while to get looking at it.
What are we looking at?
So Alice, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is all the storm infrastructure.
Yeah, these are all storm pipes, storm manholes,
infalls, outfalls, all of our storm data, just symbolized differently.
And there's a lot of stuff in here that we did just to kind of demo this a little bit easier. So Alice, do you want to go over that video? So the other thing that we wanted to show with this, because there's a lot that goes into this, but we'll kind of keep it somewhat basic, is now we have the ability to link to other systems out in the field as well. So when we start talking about integrating things and making people's jobs easier, Alice just has those glasses on. There's no special tricks here. She's able to not only access all the GIS stuff that we were just showing you, but now she's able to access a lot of the other systems. In this particular case, if we can press play on that guy.
It is playing.
It's kind of hard to see, but that is an actual video of a TV camera going through a sewer pipe. So ideally what's going to happen is she saw whatever pipe it is that she's interested in. She clicked on the pipe, she saw the attributes, what size it is, and making material, all that kind of stuff. And then she clicked on the video, and now that video is playing of the last TV video that we have of that pipe. So a whole different system, but now they have access to that in the field.
But it has to be all the data that you've entered into the GSA thing?
All of our GIS data.
Our GIS, yes.
Yes, so that's already done. Okay, there's going to be things again that pop up, but that's all done. So now she's just basically walking where she needs to go, has the glasses on, all the data below ground's above ground, and she's just interacting with that asset right there without even having to pull up another system.
What's the delay time between what's happening and when she sees it?
It's real time.
Because I'm noticing a lag.
That's only because she's streaming those glasses so you guys can see it.
Okay.
If it was just her,
It would be actual.
100% real time. So literally, she could be out in the field, I could be in the office, and I could add a new pipe and hit save, she'd see it. So again, we're starting small with this, which is everything below ground, we're bringing it above ground so you can interact with it.
Roof, so we can look at the roof.
Sorry.
So that's all. I think those are 3 or 4 different things that we've been working on that hopefully illustrate the value add to what we're trying to accomplish here. Again, walking down the street with virtual reality goggles on to interact with below ground stuff, that's, as far as we know, we're the second city in the country that's doing that. There's some other people messing around with VR and different things like that, but not real-time interaction like this. So very basic, very preliminary, but it shows you some of the capabilities we're looking at.
How long did it take you to get used to that without getting dizzy?
It took about a week. But then once I figured out to move slow and in steady paces, then I don't get motion sickness. So out on the field, it won't be too bad, but in a small space, you get a little.
I think a lot of what we were struggling with too is how do we present this to you guys? So she's got on the goggles that's streaming to the TVs and whatnot, so you guys are getting not only a little bit of lag, but a little bit of motion sickness. It's not as bad. When you have these on, you are literally walking through the pipes. You're walking down the street, and you're able to do it that way. So it's just no different than there's a pipe, I'm clicking on it, and there you are.
So can it look at various soil levels, like the sub-base under a street and the sub-base and
so
dirt?
any data that we have that would have elevation to it, so if we actually knew we had 2 feet of this, 6 inches of this, we could do that. We don't have that level of detail with soils right now. A lot of what we have is basically underground assets that is part of our capital system that we maintain.
So are all of you being trained on that, or is it just her baby?
No, well, we're definitely, Alice is definitely the go-to right now. The whole idea is proof of concept. Can we prove that this has value? And if it does, it's not going to be Alice. It's going to be more of M&O and engineering that are going to benefit from this, because we have people that are doing locates and we have people that are actually doing work on this every day. Where we start seeing some benefit now is, again, some of this remote capability, because this takes one person out in the field to have this on, and now they can interact with anyone in the city.
What's the cost on that?
I think we got this for the whole
spiel.
Yeah, the whole spiel was $7,000. Yeah.
That's a one-time cost.
Yep.
Yeah.
What about interior of buildings or interior of reservoirs?
Yep.
If you've got GIS data, then that can display that.
And the whole idea too is if we can start pairing this with the drone a little bit better, where we start having some of the models that you saw, even if we don't necessarily have a lot of the accurate GIS, we have pictures of the inside, we have things like that, we can start, these things can start working together.
I would really like you to start the conversation with Commander Stalker. If you have a police emergency, say where you're going to deploy a special weapons team, it's important to be able to visualize before you do it what you're going into. It's important to know which way a door opens, what's going to be on the other side of that. And I've spent a lot of hours drawing chalk on side a cement floor to rehearse those things. If you had virtual reality like this, you could start rehearsing a team before they actually had to work. It could save lives, it could save time, and most importantly, save lives. But that would be a wonderful conversation to have.
Let me just kind of wrap this up because I know we've probably gone over our 10 minutes. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. We've recognized as we've sat here and looked at this as part of this is the Department of Innovation and Technology, well, this is the innovation part, is the future uses of this. And you're absolutely right. Tying it in with police is a perfect example. We discovered a city in California who is using drones to take care of graffiti. So that's something else that we're looking at. The integration with this HoloLens is so broad that we can look at, and it's almost overwhelming. But that is the best way to put this is just pieces of equipment. The whole key to making this thing work is the people. You know, you guys have heard me say that before. Technology is not about boxes anymore. It's about the people who can put things together, and these are two of the people that are doing this right now. You're absolutely right. Possibilities are endless with this.
Begin the conversation, and that's both groups getting together.
And we're on a ping pong team together, so we can have
That's where we're begging.
How could you apply this in an emergency management kind of a situation or scenario?
Well, the sky's the limit. I mean, if, pick the disaster. Let's assume we have a flood. There's areas that you're not going to be able to get into. Well, with these and with the drones, you can see everything that you need to see. And that's integrated with their AOP system that these folks built, which is GIS-based emergency management. You now have real-time, actionable information when you need it. We've eliminated the delay and the latency for response. So that's, emergency management. This is all over that.
Yeah, because we can see the manholes, so if there's running water, someone with the lenses can see that there's a manhole there, so they can walk around it.
Super.
The manhole cover's gone.
And one key point that I missed too that helps with that is this thing's got basically GPS built into it, so the default is, hey, show me where I'm at. But if Auburn's underground, we could not even be in Auburn and get the same effect, because we could say, hey, we want to be there, and now we start getting the same exact experience.
I think Jerry Thorson's going to be knocking on your door very shortly.
We're in pretty good talks with him.
They're about ready to go through another quake drill here within Washington, so that might be a good tool.
Did you, yeah, Clyde?
I just want to say I'm just glad that this technology in Auburn's in place. This is just wonderful. And to be able to see I guess you might say the limitless possibilities we have. I mean, just to see like the GIS and the underground you just showed, I had no idea that technology was even available. And boy, is that valuable for everything we can do in this city, you know, everybody from public works on in the future. And as John said, through our policing activities, everything, it's amazing to see what this has done. I have to say, being out there on the golf course and watching the drone fly around this, not only can I analyze my golf swing now, but you know, I had no idea when the drone's flying around and what it was going to present. And I've got to tell you, if I was just somebody coming in Auburn today and looking at the video of the golf course, I'm looking at probably the best golf course in Washington State, because it just presented itself extraordinarily well. And it's a beautiful golf course anyhow. But
Is that because you were in the pictures?
oh, no,
Or was it
is
because Bob was?
it is a beautiful
It was the
golf
legs.
course.
It was the legs.
It is a beautiful golf course. I think, you know, we have probably the best golf course in the region, but it really showed its beauty with the clarity and the magnificence of the drone. It's just wonderfully well done. Thank you.
Did economic development give you some ideas of things that they want from the drone images?
Yeah, so honestly, we're talking with all kinds of folks here, anywhere from emergency management to economic development. We talked, and I was doing some tower inspections. We're all over the board with this drone. That was the whole idea. Is we talked about this almost 2 years ago now. It's been about a year and a half. These are just things that we're doing now to kind of close the loop on that. But that's all part of it. It is. I mean, we're doing some construction-based photos, so we're going out before they're even starting building and taking recurring photos so we can build a time-lapse thing. All sorts of different ways to use it.
Does Doug know how to access it so that when he has a potential client here, he can pull up something and show them?
Well, we do have a central location, yes, for all of anything that we do with the drone is available to everyone in the city in a centralized location. And it's basically just a repository of still images and videos that people have access to.
Okay, any other questions for IT?
Thank you very much. Great job.
Gee whiz. Okay, capital projects report. My inclination is to go through this page by page and say, you got any questions, and then we go on to the next page. Does that work for you guys?
Yep.
So we're starting on page 30 of 78, CP 1218. This is the first page I've got here. Any questions on that page? Okay.
Yeah, 277.
Okay. Which one? The wetland or the?
C222A. What's the current status?
So the current status of that project is under construction.
And what's the status with Carpinero Brothers?
So the city have met with Mr. Carpenito and talked through issues, and we are working. Great.
You see the status says you're going to have median islands. Are those going to be paved or vegetated?
Those are concrete islands.
Good. I don't want to see people out there having to maintain those.
They're paving the northbound lanes today. I don't know if anybody drove by and saw that, so.
On
Yes.
the first one, the Auburn Way corridor, the Muckleshoot one, I see that are you going to, going out west on Dogwood, turn around on Auburn Way, right there where the gas station is? Are you going to have a turnaround? I mean,
U-turn capability from
Yes.
Auburn Way at the ARCO station?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And that's what you're doing right now? Okay. We were kind of wondering.
So with the medians that will go in as part of the project, there is U-turn capability at that intersection as well as down by the Muckleshoot Plaza.
So they're no longer going to be able to drive up to the turning lane and go into the gas station? Are you going to put a medium in there?
They will not be able to turn left across Auburn Way into the gas station. They will need to turn onto Dogwood or
Okay.
do a U-turn.
Because that's has always been a big problem. Okay, thank you.
One thing to note on that project, coming up on this Thursday, there will be 2 short duration temporary closures or stoppages of the streets while they install traffic signals at the intersection of Riverwalk. And so that the message boards that are out there right now are indicating that short duration stoppage time. So let's see, 2 of those.
So I have one more question. So the overlay, because right now it's pretty bumpy, you drive on one side and you're going kind of a little sideways. Will that all even out with when the DOT comes over and does the final overlay, or are we doing the overlay?
The city is doing the overlay, and that's part of the project. Once they finish all of the signal work and all the underground work will be when they actually do that final overlay. But yes, it would be a continuous grade.
Okay, let's go to the next page. We'll start with Auburn Way North pavement reservation. Any questions on that page?
This one, we finished that today, I saw, which is really great. What is left to do outside of pavement striping and all that, but what is left to do on that particular project now that we've got the final pavement in?
The remaining work, right now, they just need to put the thermoplastic down for the crosswalk striping and then the stop bars for the signal. And then they just have to switch out the traffic signal heads that they installed as part of the one signal pole that they put up on 37. They just need to switch out those traffic signal heads. Outside that, then they'll be done.
So is that using the existing traffic signal heads or new traffic signal?
They put up the existing signal heads that were there, and they're waiting for them to come in.
I've got a question on the last one, CB 1107, former Wellfield. Is that $2,659,000 cover all of that stuff that's under the description, or just phase 1A?
So phase 1A is complete, and we are actually doing phase 2.
It's phase 1. It's phase 1B is the construction phase.
And how about phase 2? Is that part of the $2,600,000?
Well, actually, sorry, phase 1B, we did some the drilling and testing that we did. Phase 2 is the actual construction contract that's going on right now.
That's on top of the $2,500,000.
Yeah.
So that's within the $2,500,000 for that phase 2. So that's what we're actually going out to bid now for the actual physical improvements out there.
I thought it looked like a bargain to get it all done. Okay, next page. It starts with West Main Street, Multimodal Corridor, and ADS improvements. Any questions on that page?
So the M Street project, the last one on there, 1511, that project is complete, and we went through the final pay right now, which is pretty exciting.
Good to have that corridor open again.
The CP 0767, the Mohawk Plastic Wetlands Mitigation. Why are we doing that?
So that was part of an agreement with that developer that was put in place over 10 years ago, because we are on the last year of the mitigation monitoring requirement, which is a 10-year program.
So all we do is just monitor it?
We're currently just monitoring, and then if we have to do any maintenance on it, that's what that $25,000 is for.
And over by Lowe's and Fred Meyer, there's a daycare, and next to the daycare is this pond.
That is a private pond owned by the development of Lowe's and the other surrounding parcels there, so that's actually privately maintained.
And do we have any regulatory responsibilities to look at it and say that it looks polluted or it's?
So the difficulty you have up in that part of town with the color of the water, it's actually the iron oxide that's naturally occurring in the soil that you typically see coloring the water in that.
So when it's chocolate brown, that's the iron?
It's not necessarily that there is pollutants going into it other than the natural ground situation.
Thank you.
I thought about that, the ducks swimming in it and all that.
Okay, next page. It starts with water meter billing system improvements. Questions on that page? This one.
I have a question on 1513. It's mostly a confirmation or a denial. Is there already a change order on that project?
Hasn't gone through my desk, so I'd have to talk with our project.
I had a constituent ask the question, and he posed the a statement to me that there was already a change order.
Well, there might be some minor changes within the project, or so like within the project that are within the scope of the project, or the budget is there.
We don't have any idea how much that change.
So I'm not aware of a official change order, so in any of our projects, we have a minor changes item that we include, which is basically for things that are less than $5,000 changes that happen, because when you're dealing with underground work, we encounter issues all the time when you open up that ground. So we try to cover most of that already in the bid price, so that we have ways of dealing with that. I'm not aware of a specific change order that's coming for any significant changes to.
Know how to reply to him next time I see him.
Question?
Thank you.
Now, on the same item, projects suspended, what kind of private utility is going on?
There's just a relocation of an underground, I believe it's a gas line that's in the way.
And when are they going to begin construction?
They already are in construction. They're just currently, and they're in suspension for that utility work. And did you want to?
I was going to say, are you asking when is PSC going to do that gas construction, or when is our contractor
We're going to start
so we need
putting in the.
We need the gas line out of the way first, so we need PSC to complete their work first.
Yeah, they initially started with some exploratory potholing and things, and that's how we came up with this gas conflict that needed to
So
be
when
addressed.
is the utility work going to be completed?
That one, they're working on it now, and we should be done we should start construction with our contract in mid-October. So we're getting close.
Okay. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Wales.
On CP 1317, those little sensors that they put on top of the old meter boxes. Many of our meter boxes are off in portions of our yard or someplace else, but there are some that are in the sidewalks. And I know that Bill sent you some pictures of some of them, and you've gone out and flipped them over so that the cap is on the bottom side, so it's no longer a tripping hazard?
So we're not flipping them over,
Okay.
we're actually bracketing them under the lid. So that's the antenna, so it has to come through the lid. It has to come through that metal lid in order for it to work. So when we come across a situation where they are in the sidewalk and they are within the typical walking path, then we will go out and we'll bracket them to the bottom of the lid. The concern there is we have to boost it in order for the sensor to work through that metal lid a little bit better.
So have we given any consideration to when Ferguson goes out there and installs these, that they make some of those judgment calls?
Yes, so they are already doing that. There is several that went in last year that wasn't done on, and so
Okay.
we're
So we can
catching those.
continue to send
And
you.
our staff are actually catching a lot of those as they go out and do regular maintenance.
Very good.
Yeah, we can send them to you. Okay, thank you. Thank you very
On that
much.
same one, does 40% complete mean 40% of the units are in, or 40% of the money has been spent? What does
No,
it-
we actually have, I want to say, about 2/3 of the city, the meters have been changed out. We are working on the last phase of that, but there's more to this than just the meter change out. There's also the customer portal and those pieces, which we will actually start once we actually have all of the meters in place, so.
Anything else on that page? Okay, next page starts with CP 1613. Questions on this page?
So with the B Street project, they recently paved the northbound lanes over the weekend, and so that project is open to traffic. They still need to pave the final lift along B Street, but the main pavement that they needed to put down was paved, the last bit of it was paved over the weekend.
Deputy Mayor Wales.
Yeah, I've been down there quite a bit, and they are really nice in trying to keep the traffic moving, smiling, and really working with people. So whoever they are, they're pretty nice.
Okay, next page starts with CP 1523. got a question on 1701. How are we, have we got some policies written about what we are and are not going to put on that sign?
So, yes, I mean, it's similar to the policies that we use for the temporary VMS signs that we put up on Auburn Way South. So the intent is not to advertise for anybody's events that are happening, but to inform the public when events that can impact traffic are happening on that roadway.
Next page is, starts with the CP 1710. No questions on that page? All right. Next page starts with CP 1406. I got a question on 1416. I keep asking this question, but the project just seems to keep going. And are we going to cut into people's front yards to do this project, or is it going to stay within the developed right-of-way?
For the most part, it's going to stay within the right-of-way. There's a couple corner takes, especially when we get down to 9th Street, to fix that radius. I don't know if you've seen how that sidewalk on the northeast corner works, but there's a little potential property acquisition that will be needed there, but it's very minor acquisition as part of that project.
In that old part of town, I'll bet there's a lot of those sharp corners that fire trucks probably don't like. Do we have any kind of a program to fix? I know we tried to fix downtown for buses. Do we have anything we're doing to fix sharp corners in residential areas?
Not specifically for that. It depends upon the situation and what we're doing. If we're doing SOS and we happen to also be trying to fix sidewalk improvements with some of the sidewalk funds that we have, we may do that as part of that project, but we don't specifically go out and look for where to fix radiuses. I would also add that, especially in along F Street area, you have a lot of wide side streets, so while the corner radius might be tight, that's not necessarily the turning radius for the vehicle.
Exactly. There are other things you can do, like restrict parking back 40 feet instead of 20 feet.
Well, yeah, and if there's a stop sign there, it's actually 30 feet. It's already restricted per code.
But do you ever try to, or does fire ever complain about not having the access they wanted?
I have not heard specific complaints from fire on anything in that area for their turning movements.
Okay, next page, the search.
Could we do 1502, 37th Street Southeast and A Street? It says here that you're just now putting it out to bid. And so they're just going to be doing the curves and the ramps for people who walk and go through their wheelchair. And is the light going to be a four-way, or is it just going to be, because no, it's got to be one, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's a traffic signal, so it has to control all legs, all three legs for that location, as well as radius improvements, as well as preparing for U-turn capability. And you would have seen that a couple weeks ago when we did the permission to advertise. There was a map showing the layout for that signal in that packet.
Thank you.
Okay, next page starts with CP 1312. No questions on that page? Okay. Next page starts with CP 1408. Well, this is, the CP 1521 is another example of how well you guys are doing on getting preservation grants. $817,000, that's good. Okay, next page starts with CP 1707.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
I just want to make a general comment on traffic signals. Boy, the new flashing yellow caution, they work slick. They really do. I mean, whereas before you'd have to sit there and wait until your green arrow, you know, for a left turn.
I think people are learning about them too. You know, when they first went in, I saw some people kind of not knowing what to do. I haven't seen that for a long time.
I'm totally confused on the one that you're coming west on 8th Street. You've come over the Porter Bridge and you come up to that intersection. You've got the coffee shop, Trotters, and you've got Papa Murphy's, and you've got a light, and then it's got a side light for the turn, and I can't figure out when I'm supposed to go and why it doesn't work in concert with the other three.
Are you referring to the flashing yellow to make a right turn?
Yeah, but it doesn't flash. It just seems to be its own little light.
For the right turn movement, though, not the left turn movement, not the
For the
through.
right, so
So basically, a flashing yellow for a right turn movement is just a caution to
Yeah,
remind people
I can
that you
handle
need to
that.
look for pedestrians and other things that may be in conflict with that right turn movement before making that turn.
We've got quite a few of those, don't we? I can see, you know, like on M Street and.
yeah, and I got
Illinois
those. I
South.
just can't figure this
We
one
have
out.
them in a couple of locations where we have concerns with the pedestrian movement and people remembering that before they make that right, they need to check for other traffic.
Having that light down away from all the other lights, to me, makes me not see it sometimes.
Yeah, it's confusing.
Is there good data about that being just as good as having it up on the?
So the two through lights actually have to cover the primary direction of traffic. We have to have two redundant lights per the MUTCD. And so those overhead lights cannot be specific to that right turn. We would have to have a separate light up there for that right turn. And it depends upon the situation whether or not there's an actual right turn pocket or whether or not there is just a right turn capability from a through right
We
lane.
also have them for left turn, like turning down Riverwalk Way. It's a left turn signal, and I'm looking up here for it, and then, oh, there it is. So I'm wondering what the data behind the safety of those kinds of setups is. And you have to answer that right now, but I think you ought to look at it.
The Riverwalk run right now is temporary.
Oh, okay, so you're gonna have one up there eventually.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, because I didn't know it was there, and I was just parked there, and the light turned green, and I didn't know if I was supposed to go or not,
That's
then I
the
noticed
signal
it.
that's gonna, on this Thursday, that's the signal that they're going to install that traffic signal system at that
So there's
intersection.
not any.
That's not the
proof to make a
permanent
bunch of those.
installation.
Now, my mystery corner, so when I'm there, and that arrow is red, but they're to turn right, and it's an arrow, and there's nobody coming, do I still get a free right? I've been intermittently taking it to cut my chances of being arrested, but I don't know what to do there.
It's free until Steve catches you.
I take a right on it.
On a red arrow?
Stop first.
I don't,
Tribune
I
has a-
stop
Making the
first.
right, if
You
we-
don't have to wait until it's doing the yellow thing or it's green. I can
if
do
we
a
are
free
telling
right
you-
after I check.
If we are telling you that you cannot take a right turn on red, there is a sign that would be on that signal that
Right.
tells you no
And there
right
isn't.
on red.
Okay, thank you.
The News Tribune has a guy who answers these kind of questions, and he answered that question a few months ago. So I think a lot of people wonder whether.
Yeah,
You still have
okay.
to stop before you make the turn.
Yes, yeah.
Have to human
Thank
engineer
you.
some of these
I
things.
didn't see anything in here about the senior center, and we've been getting a lot of questions about that street. Every time we have coffee hour, they're always wondering if you're gonna put a light or, you know, right there, because a lot of people have almost gotten hit.
The H Street, the new H Street.
Four-way
Yeah.
stop.
Four-way stop,
Yeah,
and they
they're-
said the traffic is just, you know, people don't even stop, they see people in their little walkers, several of them said that.
And they can't move very fast either.
So are you talking about north-south traffic or east-west traffic?
It's the traffic that's coming from the community center or our new
North-south,
community-
it's north-south.
North-south, and then also the new one that you just put to go to River Road.
But it's not out on,
White River Museum.
but you're not talking about out on the Auburn Way South, you're talking
No,
about.
no, no, no,
Terminal.
Right by
You're
the.
talking about 9th Street and
Internal.
8th Street
Yeah.
intersection, and the 8th Street, both north and south, currently have stop controls there. So if they're not stopping, then that's something we can work with PD to get some enforcement out there. The east-west on 9th Street is not stop controlled, so they aren't necessarily going to stop at that intersection.
Must be that
There are no
direction then.
plans for
It's the one that does
signalization of
not
that
have the
intersection.
stop sign.
It will not have enough traffic there to generate warrants for a signal.
Every time I go, that's one of their biggest concern is that when are we gonna do something about that? Because they're gonna take for somebody to get hit to get it done. And so I didn't see anything in here. And
John and I are having a coffee hour there, so that's going to be something that's probably going to come up again. Just
Sure,
Comes up every time.
traffic safety analysis stuff we do all the time. It's not necessarily a capital project for us to go do that review, and it's on the staff's list to look at that. However, they have a long list, and it's kind of first come, first served. The first I heard about this complaint was last week, so it's been added to that list as of last week.
yeah, and I know I've said something.
It hasn't been provided prior to that,
Yeah.
so.
Ingrid, are warrants the only thing that determine, or can special circumstances like a senior center right at the intersection override the warrants?
If you put in a signal or four-way stop without the warrant and accidents happen, you generate liability for the city.
Can you explain that warrant?
So in the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, there are specific set of criteria that we use to analyze both signalization as well as stop control situations. And you have to trigger one of the various criteria in order for us to justify putting in a signal or a stop sign. And they have slightly different criteria for those different situations that considers the amount of traffic, the amount of accident history, sight distance, the amount of pedestrian traffic. All of those things can be factored into that. The problem you have when you put in something that's not warranted is people don't necessarily stop, and so because they're not expecting to stop. And so you have a lot more running of stop signs happening at those locations where they're not necessarily warranted, which creates a liability situation for the city when we do
Gotcha.
that without having the engineering backing behind why we do it.
Okay, on the page that starts with CP 1114. I've got a question on the budget. The other and the utilities and the budget don't seem to add up. There's an extra zero for one.
Well, there's
thing.
extra, there's just a typo in there.
They were trying to get a .00 in there.
There you go.
We'll get that corrected for the next.
Yeah, the
Chair,
only-
Nancy, I would like to say, this report, I use it all the time. When I go to the senior center for their coffee hour, I bring a copy of this, because invariably, there's somebody asking a question about one of these projects or leading into. And I can remember when we started this years ago, it was just a little piece of information, and now it's really broadened out. So I really like it. It's a good.
Also keep in mind, we have the interactive map on the city website that you can get us the same information and also more updated information, because we are updating it all the time.
As well as the actual location of where the project is.
Yes. So some of these things are already corrected, but it's already printed.
I'm usually a one-pager guy, but I really like the extra paper we're using here. Okay, next agenda item is the customer service dilemmas. Thank you, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Guys and gals.
I made it. Good evening. For the record, Jeff Tate, Assistant Director of Community Development. The item before council and the special focus area this evening we've titled Customer Service Dilemmas. And this is really a continuation of the presentation that Jeff Dixon, Jason Crum, and myself provided to Council back on August 28th. And we had a slide in that presentation called Customer Service Dilemmas. And at that time, we just touched on what the basics of some of those dilemmas are. And I think a lot of it comes down to the multitude of customers that the city serves. So from an application that's submitted and that customer who's seeking approval to do something on a piece of property, to ratepayers, to taxpayers, to surrounding property owners. There's all sorts of customers that we're serving. And I think we're serving that as a city. City Council, of course, sets policy and regulations, and staff implements the policy direction and regulations. So I thought it would be an interesting sort of exercise to just share some of those dilemmas more specifically, and not really seeking a council body direction, but just open conversation and just sharing experience more than anything. And I think you know, what I'd like to see is to present a few of these dilemmas a couple at a time over, you know, a period of months. And so what we've done this evening, when I say we, have talked to some of the staff to try to put together some generalized scenarios, and then some considerations related to each of the scenarios, and really just general questions that we, I think, as a city face when we're trying to serve the multiple customers that we have. So the first scenario that's described is a relatively common scenario for us to face, which is a customer comes in and they're requesting really an expedited review of a permit approval. And we most often see this with single-family residential construction, and a property owner who is really under the gun to try to get their permit approvals in order to satisfy a financing requirement. And their concern is financing falls through if I don't get my permit approvals within, you know, a relatively short period of time. In this case, throwing that into being kind of in the summer construction season, where there's lots of people who are eager to get their permits, and there's customers that have submitted in advance of this particular customer. You know, there's a plea, I think, at the counter to, you know, pay extra, or what can we do to get an expedited review or some kind of consideration to give this faster attention. And I've written down a few considerations just in terms of, well, how do you evaluate that kind of request? You got people in front of you, so there's other customers that are affected if we pull this person to the front of the line. There are the people in front of you are eager to get into construction because there's still time this time of year to get take advantage of good weather. You know, to review a single-family residential building permit, if you add up the time between building, planning, and engineering, it's about an 8-hour time commitment. And then some considerations, because we often talk about the possibility of third-party consultants to review some of those, and there's pros and cons to that approach as well. So the fifth point under the considerations on this one, you know, basically indicates that again, there's 3 different disciplines, so there's 3 different types of contractors potentially that you'd have to look at to help with a review. One of the things that I mean, there's an administrative impact, I suppose, in terms of contract administration and a few other people that are involved in contract administration. One of the things that challenges me is that oftentimes when we're reviewing code, there's lots of black and white codes, but there's lots of gray codes. And if we turn that review over to a third party, we lose some ability to take advantage of the gray areas of the code that may help a applicant. If you provide that control to the third party, you lose some of that ability to control that portion, or you have to put into place quality control provisions, which kind of takes you back into reviewing what the work was. So you have to ask yourself, I ask myself as a manager, are we are we getting good bang for buck out of that approach? And again, there's pros and cons to that. So,
Have we ever tried it?
yeah.
And what was the result?
I would tell you that we don't do it much because I think that our approach to take advantage and damage control and maybe triage is the better approach. In-house is better because we don't have to go through contract administration issues. We don't have to worry about quality control. We don't have to worry about how code's interpreted. So, I mean, I assume that when I ask these questions at council, council at some point is going to look back and say, well, what do you do? I mean, what is the answer? What's your approach? So, I think, I know there's a couple of questions, but I'm going to tell you kind of what we do in a moment. So.
Does the city have a ability to subcontract permitting?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have contractors out there.
We have an on-call contractor that can provide building plan review and building inspection services, as well as some other types of services, engineering services.
And
we can take advantage
they're
of.
reliable companies, and we've used them in the
Reliable
past.
and we trust them. I mean, we've built some rapport, so we understand kind of the relationship. I will say that we probably utilize them more for inspection services than plan review services because inspection, we've already had the ability to put our fingerprint on what's been approved, and you've literally got the blueprint in front of you. So the inspector has less discretionary area that they're working in. Plan reviewer, when it comes in across the counter and reviewing it, lots of discretionary opportunity. Once they've approved that and it's out in the field, the inspectors just go off of what was approved. So we do take it. So that's kind of one of those answers. Is sometimes we can pull an inspector that we normally that's a city employee inspector. We can pull them in for a little bit of plan review and cut loose a contracted building inspector out in the field.
So there are options that we can employ like that.
We do employ those, yeah.
And also maybe I don't know whether does the city ever get involved in the financing end with these people at all to
We do, yeah.
talk to the banks or the
Yeah.
lender?
That becomes an extremely important conversation because every lender is different. And what is the product that they're truly looking for? So the customer who 9 times out of 10, that particular customer has never had to do this before. If it's one of our normal building or builders, we probably look at them a little different and quite honestly hold them to a little bit different standard because they're used to what they have to do. But for those of us who may build a house once in our life, this is a really stressful moment.
Oh, yeah.
And so 9 times out of 10, it's that customer, and it's that customer that we do employ some of those techniques, and we talk to them about what is it that the lender is really looking for. Because sometimes we can provide a letter or a document without releasing all of the plans, and it will satisfy the lender and gives everybody a little breathing room. So really figuring out what is the product that's needed, and it's so different from one bank to the next.
Well, the important thing is we do have tools available to us to possibly help the person by expediting the process whenever we can.
Yeah.
And if there's any additional costs, those costs could be passed on to the person that is applying for the permit.
Yeah, in theory, sure.
Yeah.
And do you do that? If you call this inspection company, do you pass those costs on to the guy?
We have not done that.
Is it
And part of the
significant?
reason that we haven't done that is because the cost of applying for your permit and obtaining permit approval is a significant cost to begin with. And we have a budget to be able to pull in third-party review. I will tell you that 99% of the time we're able to triage this without the use of consultants. So really we don't have to pull that lever very often. I mean, one of the, anticipating the questions coming back to me, one of the things that a lot of this is about relationship. And all of our regular customers understand that as they come back through, there are times where they're in crunch mode and then there's times where they're not. and everybody really needs a break sometime. Can you get this done for me now, because I've got this impending issue? And so a lot of times we'll talk to our regular customers too and just say, you know, this really shouldn't affect you, but, you know, we want to be transparent about what we're doing. And I think that there's an appreciation for that transparency and just being able to talk to other customers about how we mix that and move that workload around to meet those crises situations.
It sounds like you're handling it, so why is it a dilemma?
It's hard. It's hard. The easy answer is there's 22 people in front of you. You're number 22. That takes 30 seconds to say and to move on. Triaging, quite literally, takes hours to move things around and to manage all of our customers in a way that's balanced. So the reason I say that it's a dilemma is because there's a lot of work that goes into it, and it's not the easy way out.
Okay. So it's a lot of staff time in order to solve it the way you're doing it. Okay. The big Mayor Wells.
How many building plan reviewers do you have on staff?
We have 2.
How many planners?
5.
How many development engineers?
3.
And how many permit technicians?
3.
3. And how many, if you were just to look at single building housing permits, do you get a month?
Per month?
Yeah, and let's say summer. Let's not take the winter. Let's say like in the spring, when you're peak building.
We're probably 20 to 25 a month.
Okay,
New
thank you.
construction, new homes.
That's good.
Yeah, no, I mean, 20 to 25 new homes, I would tell you that we process 4,000 permits a year. So there's new homes, and that takes up 250 to 400, somewhere in that mix per year. We're processing a lot of other types of permits that are in for review. So you asked about homes. I mean, and that is a specific answer to just single.
But I would think that they would tend to be a little more cumbersome than, say, something like a Merrill Gardens, where, you know, it's got, you know, it's not the person's first time building a Merrill Gardens.
Yeah, but they're highly complex projects. I mean, those projects are from a customer service, from that dilemma point of view.
Yeah.
That is the type of project that we're all excited about, and it takes a lot of work to go through that kind of review and approval process, and it's that kind of project that's another one of those dilemmas. How do you take the big complex project and not have it clog up the system, because there's hundreds of other applicants at any given moment who can be affected by that submittal.
So you're telling me possibly that the building plan reviewer does commercial, large-scale, and single homes?
Oh, yeah.
And the same
Plumbing
thing
and
is true with the
mechanical.
planner and the development engineer and so on, and
Yes.
the permit tech?
Yes, at a minimum.
Have you ever thought of specialization?
Well, I think that is specialization.
No, that sounds like they do it all. That the building plan reviewer does commercial, single-family
Well,
remodels and...
So we take, we have those 2 building plan reviewers. Now, when you break down into the 2 building plan reviewers, one is primarily residential and one's
Okay.
primarily commercial. So there is
Okay.
that subset
Good.
of kind of
Good.
specialization for sure.
Okay, good. And I'm sure then they can cross-help if...
Oh, yeah.
But it never gets light there, so I'm sure...
Well,
yeah.
I mean, they both hit different seasonal peaks.
Yeah.
So actually, the residential plan reviewer will bail out the commercial plan reviewer when that list gets long, because they're both technically qualified to do both.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
I think, Jeff, I really like how you're approaching this. I like how you're triaging it, because that's important. Having been on that side of the world for a long time and you know, trying to acquire permits, I know sometimes the process can be very frustrating. How often does this happen with a single-family home builder where their financing's at risk?
Half a dozen times a year.
Okay, so that's not too often. That you know, I like all your different approaches, and you did mention about paying extra, and I think it's important, if we can, to take a look at offering to work overtime to address a specific need if the bank is unwilling to move in that fashion. I've had that happen a few times, and it's to me, it saves some projects being able to do that. it can be a little difficult on staff sometime, but, it does give you the option to at least offer another alternative scenario in case, we can't come to other type of resolution. I also like the fact about you talking about providing letters to the lending institutions, because for me, it's almost mind-boggling that lending institutions would expect permits to be done in such a short period of time when they know that a permit does take a substantial period of time, even if it's a single-family home. I guess unless you're just taking a stock plan off a shelf that's already been approved, a dozen times or so. But I like your approaches, and I think, again, letters and then offering perhaps overtime would be something I would think would be a little added to it.
Yeah, and thank you for the feedback. That is, when we review a permit for, say, a new house, we know when that application's coming in that it's approvable. It's got to meet the code, but it's approvable. In 2 months, it's going to be approved. And so I think that we're comfortable putting out, being out on a limb a little bit to say it may not have been approved yet, but we're approving it. And I think that lenders have responded to that. Most of them have, with a fair amount of comfort in allowing the process to move forward.
Right, it's important. I mean, you're showing a real good element of customer service here, and it's important for the public to understand that it's not you're number 22 in line and that's it. You're looking at a number of different approaches to help people get through the process as painlessly as possible.
Try to.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you're maintaining that, addressing the gray areas and not just doing black and white. I think that's very good.
I was just going to say I like your approach. Does most cities do the same thing, write letters to help other builders, or are we the only ones that are doing? Are we just the only?
The different cities have different philosophies on this, and I think that you'd find some cities would say take the approach that you're number 22, wait in line. But I think most cities probably don't approach it that way. They do try to help and triage. The letter writing, I can only tell you based upon the feedback that I get from some customers, which is that is not something that they would have expected the city to be open to, and it's not something that when they talk to their architect who may have designed the home, that their architect would have said that is not something they're used to seeing. So, I mean, when sometimes you're interacting with that customer who has no experience in being able to tell whether you're providing good service or bad service, because they don't have anything to compare it to.
I
They're
think
just
that's
in
a
crisis
good service
mode.
we're offering. That's
Yeah.
really a big help.
It's been received well. So.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to give you a live testimony, okay? I was up in finance today paying my excitable water bill.
Oh, yes.
For the summer. It's lower than last year, but my wife budgeted ahead, so we're okay. But this gentleman was up there with a roll of paper and his plans. So I had a moment, so I introduced myself to him. And I said, hey, how are things going? Are you satisfied with your permitting process and everything? He says he's very happy. He was very happy with the way that he's been treated up there, and everything is speedy. So, happy builder.
Thank you for that
Developer.
feedback.
Deputy Mayor Wills.
I have a neighbor that can at times be a little testy, and I went to visit her, and they came up with some innovative way to do a railing on a porch that they remodeled, and they had nothing but stellar things to say about not only the speed but the quality of the assistance that was provided and stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Okay, are you going to talk about the other scenario too?
Yeah, we need to talk about fees.
That's what's
Yeah.
So in this scenario, this is a real life scenario. This one, you know, again, this is the type of thing that probably only happens a couple times a year, but it does put us into a bit of a tailspin. And let me just put this out there. It's hard to say no. And we know that no has a ripple effect. And we know that everybody in this room is part of that ripple. So when customers approach us and they present us with some of these types of dilemmas, and this is a very real example, whether it's stated or whether it's implied, sometimes we know that us providing a no answer means that someone in here is going to get some phone calls or some visits and things like that. So, so architect comes to the counter and says, I got a package to submit. It's for a warehouse in the C3 zone. And we scratch our heads and say, warehouses aren't allowed in the C3 zone. And they say, customers already paid $30,000 in design fees. They have someone to occupy this warehouse. And if you don't take this in and start, figuring out a way to get through an approval process, there's going to be some visits across the street. And that kind of interaction happens, and that kind of interaction makes everybody nervous. In this case, and as we've heard in other cases, the property owner's been trying to do something with that property for a while. That particular zone may not, it seeks to establish one type of use, they're proposing another type of use, and that goes to the dilemma that I had mentioned on August 28th about flexing to say yes. Are there ways to say yes? Again, the code may say no, and we spent a lot of time in gray areas, but that's a pretty black and white area. And again, considerations are that I think that there's a concern expressed at the counter that we're being unreasonable. We need to be more flexible and figure out a way to say yes. I think in the back of our mind, we're saying we want all of our customer service interactions to be positive, and it's hard to have it be positive when you say no. Of course, there's ways to say no, good ways and bad ways, but we're probably going to hear that in another jurisdiction this might be easier, or that right now there's no revenue being generated for the city, and if we go into construction, revenue will be generated in sales tax and increased property tax. But one of the things that we look at when we think about the code is, what are the optimal uses that have been established through policy? And in this particular case, warehouses are one purposely put in here because it challenges us. There's a demand for them in the community, but they don't reap the same kind of return, long-term return, relative to jobs and retail sales tax and things of that nature. So it's kind of a classic example of, do you try to find a way to say yes? Are there, I don't know. This one's harder than the first one. The first one's kind of a softball.
Does that have to go through the conditional use permit process?
No. If it's prohibited, it's prohibited. There is no option to have apply for a conditional use permit when it's outright prohibited. And when you look at the code, it says C3 in the table, warehouses, prohibited, X.
The CUPs don't solve that, no?
CUPs don't. There's a different, I think it's C. It'll say C if a conditional use permit is an available approach. But if it's an X, it's an X.
And is that state law, or could we change that?
City council can determine what uses are allowed or not allowed in each zone. So, today it's an X, but it's an X by council direction because the ordinance the council adopted.
Okay, so we could change various bits and pieces of the code to say C.
Yeah.
And then the hearing examiner would determine it. And he almost always says yes because
yeah. So, definitely, there's legislative discretion that council has, and if council thought prohibited is not the right category for a warehouse in the C3, they could try to cue that into planning commission, because ultimately changing that code zoning codes has to go to planning commission first, go through SEPA, go through public hearing, go through state agency, 60-day review. All those things have to happen before it can come to council. So then council could take that action and create it as a C, and then yes, conditional use permits go before the hearing examiner or a site-specific proposal.
And he seldom has a reason to say no. I personally don't think that it is a good approach to do these bit-by-bit changes. Claude, you had a question?
I guess, yeah. Shouldn't the architect know they can't build in a C3 zone? I mean, to me, that's obvious, because the architect has to do the site plan, albeit maybe with their engineer. They have a front page of notes that includes zoning. I mean, it's all there. Why is this architect not telling his customer you can't build there? That's, to me, it's obvious. Yeah, I mean, it's just, you hire an architect, the architect's got to do their job. So that's just my statement.
Well, I've got a little bit of a rebuttal to that. My sister's an architect for 40 years over in Honolulu, and she often gets customers who say, you have all this experience, you can bring in some favors, can't you still do it even though it's not allowed? Yeah. And she says no, but then they pester her till she goes through the process of getting told no.
But I think before the client spends $30,000 on
Yeah,
design,
that, for sure.
They should do their due diligence, do the research, and say, I did check, and the answer is no, and by the way, you don't owe me anything. But, I mean, to me, it's unreasonable that an architect, to me, would take that approach and have commitment that kind of funding before we go any further.
Didn't we just have a similar situation, maybe not exactly similar, but along the same lines, with a organization that went out and did a lot of tenant improvements to a place? Marijuana?
Yeah.
Well,
they went out on their own and spent a lot of money up front when they knew, they didn't have a permit.
I think looking at some TI work for the regulated business that we were going into, yes, they should have done more of their homework as well, knowing whether or not they could have done anything in that particular area. And of course, we addressed it zoning-wise. But if it's already an existing zone that says C3 and it says no, it's pretty plain, it's pretty clear. You can't build there, find another location. Or come in and ask the city council to change the zoning regulations.
And there's a process.
The process to go through that.
We've all heard our fair share of stories. I heard one about a remodeling that got put in the wrong stack, and they ended up waiting an extra month, but they loved you guys because you've been so helpful in the past and the explanation they could believe and so on and so forth. And so I don't hear much about how long it takes. What I hear is the price, the cost. So I hope that as we move forward in this, I like this scenario because it helps us conceptualize and feel your pain, but see the reality of it. I would like to look at some of the fees that we're charging, and because that might be an area where we can look at making some changes.
And we'll have one on that.
Good.
So that's already on the list, and we'll talk about that for sure.
On both, in both scenarios?
It'll be, each time, it'll be a slightly different scenario, but fees are a subject of a couple scenarios, so.
We could also bring in some too, I'm sure.
Well, I think our process in the past has always been cost recovery, but that was done way before we got real interested in economic development.
Yeah.
And then you can say that, having lower fees helps with economic development. So I think I'm up for this conversation.
So are you saying that what we've been doing with our fees and stuff has been cost recovery?
No, I don't know that.
I can't imagine, but it sure feels like it in some situations. And that's why it'd be nice to look at it and review it, because it may not be the case. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Jeff.
Yeah.
Give us a lot more.
Thank you, Jeff.
Feeling of what's going on. Okay, ordinance 6660, which we discussed on the council floor at some length. Let's give it another shot here.
So on September 25th, when we last talked about this Planning Commission recommendation for ordinance 6660, there were a bunch of things that were talked about, but as the conversation ensued, one of the requests from council was to come back and schedule it for this meeting, talk a little bit more about the Planning Commission's recommendation. And in your packet, what I've included is, well, all the materials from September 25th are included just so that you had that all together. But in addition, is a cover memo, which starts on page 46. And it includes a little bit of background. It includes some principles and considerations, as we've termed them, several maps, because there were questions about location of AEP, and so we presented some more maps to help maybe portray the picture. And then we drafted 4 sample motions, maybe to help when this matter does get to council floor for motions and seconds and votes and actions and things of that nature. So one of the things that I think is important to just walk through real quick, starting on page 46 with principles and considerations. So I won't spend a lot of time with these, walk through them real quick, but again, council took action under ordinance 6584 on December 14, 2015, and that's really important because whatever decision council makes on this, just a reminder that council took action under that ordinance to eliminate the EP zone, granted as part of a whole comprehensive plan update. So it wasn't an isolated action. But that ordinance did eliminate the EP zone from the comprehensive plan, so it doesn't exist anymore in the plan, it exists in the zoning code only. So important just for situational awareness to keep that in the back of your mind. As a result of that action, we currently have an inconsistency between the comprehensive plan and the zoning regulations. That's not something that we want to have continue for very long, so whatever the actions are that are taken, eliminating that inconsistency is important. You know, conversation came up last time about land use policy actions. Kevin came up, talked a little bit about just market forces and being aware of what's out there and what's driving land use activity, and you know, balancing both the public and the private short-term and long-term needs, maximizing public return on investment. Talked a little bit about the original conception of the EP zone, about the incentives that were contemplated early on but never came to fruition. You know, additionally, we talked about the fact that since 2006, when the EP zone went into effect, there's been a lot of advancement in technology and industry practices, more embracing and cost effectiveness of sustainable approaches. And then on page 47, just that's the start of some maps. So I wanted to show, because the question came up where the Auburn Environmental Park was relative to this area, so, and which public lands are out in that location. So obviously north-south you see Highway 167 there, and on the east side and on the west side there's publicly owned lands. It's a different mix of public ownership, of state and local city ownership, and really it's that lower area where I've labeled AEP, where that's the area where the boardwalk is and the birding tower. So it's down in that location. There's a later image that shows you that on an aerial photograph. Page 48 shows that exact same map, but on the north side of Main Street, I've added in where the EP zone is today. And you can kind of get a sense of some, you know, relative parcel sizes, and you can faintly see some buildings in there. I think they're easier to see on the aerial photograph. But that's the mix on the north side. And I included that because I know that one of the ideas that came up was moving the Planning Commission's recommendation forward on the south side of Main Street, but not on the north side. So I wanted to to highlight that area. Page 49 just scrolls down a little bit to the south and shows the EP zone on the south side of Main Street. You can see that, you know, the larger mix of parcels in there. Page 50, same map as the prior, except now it puts the aerial photograph underneath so that you get a sense of that, the built environment that exists in those areas. And then the next page, 51, the top map, an aerial, same as the prior, except now it adds wetlands into onto the overlay as well, so you can get a sense of where those features are out there. And then the images down below, again, are intended to show where the boardwalk and birding tower is relative to all the properties. Yeah?
Yes.
Are those blue, these over here on your left-hand side?
The blue hatched area?
Are those the wetlands?
Yeah, everything on that image that you see that's got that blue cross-hatching in it, which all of that is wetland.
Plus a lot of the AEP is wetland.
Yeah, most all of the AEP is wetland. And what I think is kind of interesting is when you look at the areas that are zoned EP and see where the wetlands are relative to those properties, not by accident. The areas that are undeveloped in the EP zone are also pretty wet. So that's what the remaining undeveloped area in the EP zone is primarily saturated areas. And then I'll be happy to answer questions on pages 52 and 53, but I attempted to provide 4 sample motions for the types of things that were discussed back in September. The first one is a motion to accept the Planning Commission's recommendation and what the effect is and what would happen next. The second option would be to remand it back to the Planning Commission for further consideration, remand the whole ordinance back, and what the effect of that is and what would happen next. Third option is to accept the Planning Commission's recommendation for a portion of the area, so really defined by geographic boundary, and I've included in there as an example, accepting the Planning Commission's recommendation for everything south of Main Street, but not so for north of Main Street, and to remand that portion back to the Planning Commission. And then option 4 is for the City Council to move forward with its own public hearing and own actions. That's your prerogative. So you have the option to remand it back to Planning Commission if there's something that's not satisfactory with that recommendation, or you have the option to move forward and take your own action after holding your own public hearing. And then there's a series of questions just to consider to help with the conversation.
One thing that's missing in here, Jeff, is the case that I made that one of the reasons for rating EP zone was to attract high-paying jobs. And I think that's a big missing that you've got in the best use as opposed to the highest value use. Because there are other advantages to the city from good-paying jobs that aren't necessarily reflected in profit to the owner of the property. So I'd like to see that included if we do take an action here that requires it to go back to the Planning Commission. I'd like them to understand that thinking of the council at the time EP was created.
And if it's remanded back to Planning Commission, all or a part, then that becomes part of the guiding principles back to the Planning Commission to consider in their additional work.
Exactly, but you didn't capture them here, so I'm making sure you don't forget them.
Sure. Okay.
Okay, other questions, comments? No?
John, you were pretty vocal on this last time, and I think I agreed with some of your comments, probably 80% of the comments, John.
Well,
maybe 75.
That's great. You know, I get over 51% with Bill Pelosa, and I'm lucky.
But you know, I agree with helping out the owners of the EP properties. And I'd like to see this go back to the Planning Commission one more time. The thing that I'm supporting as whole, and that's the AEP. The environmental park is something that is rare in cities. And this is a rare environmental thing for citizens. Right now, it needs vegetation pruning. Bring it back to where people can utilize the boardwalk and the bird viewing tower and all that. But I mean, it's a gorgeous area. So I support that remaining whole.
Other comments or questions? Yes, Deputy Mayor.
I thought I was agreeing with you too, John, that we did some incentives and they didn't appear to work. And maybe we ought to move on. And so I'm willing to give the environmental park a chance to be cleaned up. But I think the rest of it, we need to change the zoning and say that the incentives didn't work and we need to move on to something else.
Well, my point is, we did not create the incentives.
Yeah.
There has never been an incentive program, and I think it's mainly in the flexibility of development standards that the council envisioned that was happening. You know, most guys on those kind of properties want to fill up the whole lot, and we've been in 35%, just to leave some room for incentive. And there's a lot of things like that in what seemed like very restrictive requirements. It was based on we were going to do incentives, which we didn't do. I'm in favor of option 3, where we go ahead with the M1 zoning on the south side of Main Street, and we remand to the Planning Commission the discussion of the north part. Suggestion made by Councilmember DeCourcy at the council meeting. So that's where I'm at. I think that we're over optimistic on how much of an attraction the EP would be to businesses. And so making that much land EP is not sensible. But keeping some part of it to try to attract those high-paying jobs and just make our city look a lot better than having a whole lot of tilled-up concrete. I favor your motion number 3.
My question was, and I wrote myself a little note here, what were the incentives that?
They were never done. That's the point.
Ever,
We didn't give it a chance.
Never
proposed or anything?
Oh, yeah, we did a couple of workshops, and one of the main ones was land coverage, 35%, no business wants to do that. And so we were saying that if the person creates a building on stilts that doesn't disturb the land and yada, 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 he gets to cover 90%. And that was only discussions, and it never delved into all the possible incentives, nor the possible other things that might happen, like infrastructure improvement. We were going to talk about that. Do we want to do like we did downtown and put in all the storm drainage so people have to pay for that? Do we want to offer incentives of no traffic impact fees like we did downtown? Well, that all got talked about, and then it got stuck in the planning department and never get a chance. So I say we need to give it a chance on the north side. Go ahead and take care of the property owners on the south side, who are most of the people that are complaining anyway.
Well,
Bill?
Do we have any landowners that were wanting to change on the north side?
I'm not of those who have been interacting with the city. There's 4 or 5 of them. They're all on the south side.
Oh, okay.
But maybe some people will come out of the woodwork and do that.
Yeah.
For instance, back then, the people who had the residential properties were not all that excited about the idea. They wanted to just keep it residential, which most people, when they have a home, want to keep it residential. And they weren't really thinking about the most value for the land or the incentives or the high-paying jobs. They were just thinking about they don't want to move their house. So you'll probably get that again from the people who have houses there.
But why do this at halfway? I mean, the EP, EP process, it failed. It
It did not fail because we didn't do the incentives.
Well,
Failed.
okay, but it's still, we failed in the planning.
Yeah, okay.
And that's what more or less I meant, Rich. So why don't we just do the whole thing? I mean, get it out, do it. Why have half and half?
John?
If you gotta cut the puppy dog's tail off, you might as well only cut it once.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
You know, I brought this up last time, we need incentives, and if we're gonna spend the time to make incentives, let's do it on Main Street. Let's not do it out there where our lovely environmental park is. Let's let it go back to light, and let's ask the Planning Commission to help us with incentives for Main Street. And that's what our public is telling us. They want more in Main Street. They're not talking about, and I went down to the environmental park on Sunday. Let's put our incentives on Main Street.
Other comments? Yes.
I like what you're saying, Rich, regarding option 3. There's more time to review it, but I really like the process of incentives because that's what helps bring business in.
Yeah.
And if we're going to do something, I think we need to focus on the incentive aspect of it. Yeah.
Well, motion 3 would put the north part back to the planning commission. It would be a no action by the council and have the planning commission look at it. They may come back and say, forget it, the CP just isn't going to work, even with these incentives. I think we shouldn't have them consider it until we have some incentive work done. But once we do, and if they say, you still got to let them build warehouses, that's probably where we end up, is with the whole thing M1. But I think we need to give that north side, which is the most like what the council back then thought would be appealing to green businesses and higher paying jobs, is it's right in the middle of the EP environmental park. Bringing in that south end, I think, was a mistake in the beginning. I agree with changing that. The north end. John?
We use the term incentives a lot, but in reality, incentives equal dollars. And I just as soon concentrate the dollars that we have to spend in our core. As much as I love the environmental park, Mr. Pelosa, I think that's a treasure, a gem for the park. But the zone just we might be able to make it work with more incentives. By spending more money on it, we could get it to work, maybe. I'm not willing to spend money in the hopes that we can make it work.
Well, it doesn't cost you any money to allow them to put 90% coverage instead of 35. That costs zero.
There is going to be costs associated with doing the changes.
Well, it's not well for the builder, of course.
It'd be in our comprehensive plan changes. That'd take about a year to do.
True. The people out there have lived with the EP zone for 10 years, one more year isn't going to break them. But if we can agree on the south side, where the people are currently complaining, then we can move now. And, Jeff, is that true? We could move in this round of the comprehensive plan on the south side?
Comprehensive plan changes, there's nothing in this topic that we can add to the 2017 comprehensive plan changes. That'll be a 2018 process.
Why can't we do it in 2017?
That's already been presented to the Planning Commission. That's already moving forward for the 2017 cycle.
And they can't have a special meeting to accommodate all these property owners down there?
There's a substantial amount of administrative process that goes along with it. I mean, SEPA's already been issued. The The public notice has already been put out. Planning Commission is holding its first public hearing on October 18th. So it would be hard, not impossible, but it would be hard to add in the 2000, this into the, in fact, I don't think it can be, because we won't have the ability for staff to prepare the materials to present to Planning Commission, the draft incentives or whatever that may be, for the 2017 cycle.
But you don't have to do that right away. What you have to do is get the south side done in M1, which I think everybody here agrees, and that could be in the 2017.
So that's it. And I'm sorry, I apologize, because I think that what I heard was a different question than that, because you've already got the Planning Commission's recommendation right now to change the zone. You can accept through motion 3. If council approved motion 3, it will take the south side of Main Street and rezone it to M1. And the issue's done.
In time for 2017 council.
Right. Yeah, it would happen if you advanced it to the next council meeting next week. It would be in effect about 2 weeks from right now.
Well, and that's what I thought, that if we can quit arguing about this as we are and get on with the one where the people are complaining, they get it in the next few months. And then we take the time to do the incentives and talk to the Planning Commission about the north end, and that comes through in 2018, one way or the other. It's a recommendation for M1 or a recommendation to keep EP with the addition of incentives. So I don't think what you said is quite right, John, about putting it off or so on.
Well, so we would have, so council, if motion 3 moves forward, the comp plan changes have already occurred, so there's no comp plan work to do in 2017. What happens is the zoning map changes for the south side of Main Street, and on the north side of Main Street, we remain with that inconsistency between the comp plan and the zoning regulations. That's the vulnerability that's created.
Why is it
that would exist for another year.
Why is that a vulnerability?
If someone comes in to submit an application, we have a zoning regulation that we can apply. But that zoning regulation, and this could happen today, but for the next year, we'd still have the zoning regulation effect that's inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. So there's a vulnerability in there. The longer that inconsistency exists, the more vulnerable the city is to whatever challenge, depending upon how we apply the zoning code, but not apply the comp plan, or that we apply the comp plan but not the zoning code. Since they say two different things.
So what about accepting the Planning Commission as they recommended and changing the whole thing so that it's not inconsistent with the comp plan, but then take the time before the comp plan amendments are due next year to work on those incentives, and then submit a change back to EP if that's what you decide to do. That way the city isn't vulnerable during that time. I can't imagine there's going to be a whole lot of movement in that area. But then bring it back as a proposed comp plan amendment next year to change it back to an EP.
Rich, I'd much prefer that, getting the comp plan and our zoning linked again as soon as possible, and then be open to the next comp plan revision to add incentives and perhaps bring back another zone that uses something besides environmental park zones, so we can end that confusion. But as you've been stressing, needing something that attracts green businesses. And I'd be very open to that.
So Jeff, do you think that works?
Yeah, I think that what I would recommend obviously this is gauging of temperature right now, but if council took action on Monday and that was an appealing option for the majority of council members, it really comes down to motion 1 with direction. And I think that, you know, again, just like I offered last meeting, I'd be happy to polish option 1 so that it provides some of that kind of direction so that you could look at that ahead of time and wordsmith it to however council is comfortable with, but at least put something on the table to work from.
Yeah,
I think
we-
that
we
would be an
committed
excellent
then to
idea.
looking at it next time around, yeah. John?
And then one last comment. Given your knowledge of this particular zone and the incentives and your depth of knowledge of the comp plan and engineering, and the fact that you'll be leaving us after this term, give me some notes, and I promise I'll take them forward.
Trust me.
Because I like what you're saying.
Well, I didn't say that. Sorry.
Okay, well, so are we kind of on consensus that we're
Yes.
suggesting option 1 with the direction in the
I
ordinance?
think that's a smart move.
For 2018 comp plan analysis. Okay, so I guess
Yes.
that tells you what you need to put on the council agenda. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much.
Go forth and do great things.
Thanks.
We're going to move on to Roman numeral 5, other discussion items. Roman numeral 6, new business. And then let's look at the matrix, page 77 and 78.
Well, Bill, you wanted, in a letter to Kevin, asked for investigation of traffic calming in residential neighborhoods.
Yeah.
We need to get that on here for, what, the 12/11? Which is the next, well, is there one before 12/11? Yeah, there must be. Not for public works, but there is for general, if we could.
Do we have the dog, do we have the dangerous dog one on here yet?
I'll comment to that.
Okay, great, please.
But are you finished?
Yep.
Yeah, under the
Which color, yellow?
salmon, under the salmon color, I had recommend removing police calls for mental health issues to a later, and then insert dangerous dog ordinance.
I think you'll see that on the agenda that came out.
Yeah.
That change was made.
Yeah,
It's just
I
that
got
this was
an
already-
email from Danny today.
And what was the other one, calming? Where were we going to put calming?
Traffic calming?
Yes.
On 12/11.
Well, 12/11's already pretty full.
Yes.
The next one would be 11/13, wouldn't it?
But,
No,
Where are you guys at?
12/11 is the next public works one. Well, but wait a minute, what I was saying is maybe we can put it into the deputy mayor's
Yeah.
agenda.
Yeah.
The next one.
Okay,
Okay.
good, because that's one of the issues I'm interested in. Any other additions?
I just want to make a comment.
Yes, please.
Margaret, I'm sorry, where did you put that one?
Traffic calming is going to be under deputy mayor next study session. Bill Pelosi?
Yeah, one of the things that has been bugging me about this, the council matrix, is that it looks like Public Works is going to have a 4-hour, 5-hour meeting with all the agenda items. And I was in a quandary under the salmon, and dropping out mental health just to bring on dangerous dog ordinance, because it is more, has more priority in my mind. Under the, I'm going to bring back this again, under the old system of council committees, we were meeting on a monthly basis. Now we're meeting on a 2-3 month basis. And we're not able, at least I'm not able, to squeeze in the topics that should be covered in a quick manner. So I'd just like council to give it some thought that I don't think like October, like in municipal services as an example, we're meeting on the 23rd, but we don't meet again until December 26th, 2 months later.
Well-
And we're, in my opinion, we're not moving forward some of the topics that we should be moving forward without a lot of administrative swapping and all this stuff. Under the council committee method, we were getting more topics from staff. Now it kind of appears that the chair or vice chair has to come up with the topics. Whereas before, we could collaborate with staff and fill a month's agenda rather than going to have 9 or 10 topics every 2 months.
Well, I think Claude's collaborating too much. I'm joking, but I know that Yolanda collaborates a lot with Dana on the items.
I do with
Finance.
Shelley, too.
As does Rich.
So, and again, with the orange here, looks like we got a lot going, Claude. So maybe we can help do something in the area, municipal services, that would answer your need, but the other people seem pretty comfortable.
Well, no, Public Works has always been huge.
Yes.
Always. Look at it. I mean.
And now it's got community development in with it. It's like the two biggest committees we used to have are now crammed into one study session.
Yeah. And anyway.
Well, maybe we need to talk about this at our next study session. Maybe it's time that we look at splitting that apart and doing something smaller, building finance with Bob into, you know, the deputy mayor portion or something.
Well, I have a
Yes,
question,
Bob.
like number 11 there, council budget priorities. Shouldn't that be under finance?
I would think so. Yeah, I would think so.
Okay. Do you want me to move that down to
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
blue?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. On any other items?
Deputy Mayor, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I apologize. Would it be possible for the traffic calming to be pushed back a little bit? My team is overwhelmed right now, and getting ready for that at the next study session would be very difficult.
Yeah.
So if we could
I
look
think
maybe
we-
into November.
Yeah, I think that you kind of work with.
I just heard, I heard
Yeah.
next study session, so if we could just beseech the council to have a little bit more time. They're very, very busy.
Because we really want to listen to some of the Ingrid's research on the different kind of calming bumps or whatever she calls them.
So could I
Yeah.
ask for
Yes.
council's indulgence for the second meeting in November? That would allow my team to
Yeah.
get a little bit ahead right now. They're
But we do need to do
overwhelmed.
the dog one because we've had a couple of dog issues and it's nice to review those.
Deputy Mayor?
Yes.
So, Danny, because we're removing council budget priorities and putting it into finance, let's keep the police calls for mental health issues. Keep it on. And also the dogs.
Yes, and then we're going to move the traffic calming for you to decide when it needs to be scheduled. Okay? Yeah, that would be great. Councilmember Baggett.
I have a little bit of a conflict with something we've got down here for finance, November 27th. I'm going to be on vacation during that time. Can we come up with a different date?
Do we
I'll
need
be
to
on
have
vacation from the 21st to the 28th, through the 28th.
Oh.
We do have a vice chair, though.
Yes.
Well, and we also,
True,
yeah.
that's right. That would be Mr. Wagner.
Yeah, is that going to work for you or not?
Sure, that would
Okay.
work.
Okay. Councilmember Holman.
You know, if there is urgency to a matter and it's not your committee's turn to be up anytime soon, you can always defer that over to the deputy mayor in a general session.
Yeah.
That was one of the design features of the study session, that we could move it around. There is flexibility.
But I do like any attempts that we make, including what you have to offer, Kevin, in trying to get these a little bit more balanced in length, so that we know that we take our 7 o'clock break and we know that we go home before midnight.
Building closes at 10:30.
Okay, anything else? Meeting's adjourned, thank you.
Oh, those are sweet words.